Hello everyone. This is the first 3 hours of my 26-hour premium WordPress course. I hope this helps you get started learning and experimenting with WordPress. Have fun, and I'll see you around. If you want to unlock the full power of WordPress by learning about code, you've come to the right course. Because I've spent the last 12 years living and breathing WordPress, PHP, and JavaScript. And now I'm here to teach you everything I know. Here's a quick summary of what we are going to learn. We are going to create a completely custom interactive site for a fictional university. In order to do that, we need to learn how to install WordPress on our personal computer so that we have a private playground of WordPress to practice with, the very basics of the PHP language, which is what powers WordPress, how to code a brand new theme, how to create custom post types. So beyond just blog posts and pages, we will set up post types like professors and campuses and events and programs or majors. How to create relationships between different pieces of content. So for example, we can associate a professor with the matching programs or majors that they teach. How to create an interactive map powered by our campus posts. How to create a JavaScript-powered live search feature. We will allow open registration so anyone can visit our site and sign up for a basic account. We will leverage the WordPress REST API to create a My Notes feature, as well as another feature that lets users like or heart a professor in real time on the fly, and much, much more. Now, I would love to have you come along on this journey with me, and if you're ready to launch your career as a WordPress developer, I will see you on the inside. Hello everyone, and welcome to the course. In this video, I want to give you a bird's eye view so you know what to expect. Big picture, the goal of this course is for you to learn how to code completely custom websites with WordPress. We are going to build a site together for a fictional university, and along the way, we will slowly but surely become a WordPress developer. First, I will have you install WordPress on your personal computer so that you have a private playground copy of WordPress that you can practice and experiment with. Next, we will take our first look at the PHP programming language. This is what powers the core of WordPress, but don't worry, you don't need any prior experience with PHP. After that, we will learn how to code and create a brand new theme. After that, we will learn how to create custom post types. There is an entire world of WordPress beyond just posts and pages. For example, let me show you the admin dashboard for our finished product in this course. In my sidebar, we see posts and pages, just like in a normal WordPress installation, but I've also got campuses and events, programs, professors, notes, likes. And each of these post types has its own unique set of fields, instead of just a generic title and body field. So for example, if I click on professors, and then if I click to edit my professor named Dr. Barks a lot, yes, we do have the generic title and body field, but we also have page banner subtitle and page banner background image, which if we view this post on the front end, those fields control this background image that is unique to just this professor page. Here we see the page banner subtitle just for this one professor. And also, if we scroll down a bit, we see this related programs field. So in this left-hand column, you can choose from the different programs or majors that are available at this school, and you move them over here to say which one this particular professor teaches. And then this relationship between professor and program gets reflected on our front end. So on this professor page, if I scroll down, we see subjects taught, biology. This allows us to create relationships between different pieces of content. And this opens up all sorts of possibilities. So for example, if I click on campuses up in the header, we've got this interactive Google map with pins on it, and each pin is a campus post. So for example, we've got our downtown west campus, and if I click on that, it takes me to that detail screen for just this one campus. And if I scroll down, we can see programs available at this campus, math. So long story short, custom post types and custom fields allow us to programmatically relate different content together in really compelling ways. Okay, after that section of the course, we will move on to learn about JavaScript. Our first big JavaScript project in this course is to power our live search results. So for example, I can either press the S key on my keyboard, S for search, or just click this search icon up in the top right. And that opens up this full screen transparent overlay, and my cursor is automatically placed in this search field. So I can just start typing for whatever I'm searching for, and on the fly, in real time, we get our search results. And not only that, but they are organized by the content type. So I searched for biology. Here we have any related blog posts or pages, programs, professors, related campuses, and even any upcoming events that have to do with biology. Now there's really two main aspects to the JavaScript here. Part one is the JavaScript to power the actual user interface, right? Opening and closing the overlay and responding to click events, things like that. And then the other aspect of the JavaScript is actually communicating with the WordPress server on the fly in real time, right? Because when someone searches for something, we need to send that search string to the server. And then on the other hand, we also need to receive this incoming data from the server. And all of this needs to happen in real time. So this is a great exercise to learn all about JavaScript. I think you're going to love this portion of the course. Just a bit of a spoiler, the WordPress REST API is what makes all of this possible and very elegant to set up. Okay, then in the next section of the course, we will learn about user roles and permissions. So if you want to have multiple people help maintain the website, you do not need to give everyone administrator access. So for example, if you wanted to invite a friend or a coworker, and the only thing you wanted them to be able to do is manage the event post type, you could set that up. Or if you wanted someone to be a campus manager, you could restrict them to only be able to change those type of posts. Or you can mix and match different permissions. Maybe someone should be able to post into the blog and manage programs, but that's it. The possibilities are endless, and learning about roles and permissions will really open up new collaboration doors. Moving on, in the next section of the course, we will allow open registration. So for example, if I log out, I'm currently signed in with my admin account, but I can click log out. And then if I visit the website again, you can see that if a stranger visits the website, they can log in or even sign up. So with open registration, any random visitor can sign up for a basic account. And once someone with a basic account signs in, that gives them access to two new features. The first feature is My Notes. And in this portion of the course, we really sink our teeth into the WordPress REST API. We basically create our own mini single-page application. So if a student brings their laptop into a lecture hall, they can take a note, biology note number 5, and take a few notes, right? Lorem ipsum, class was amazing. Click create note. On the fly, it gets added here and saved into the database. They are free to create another note, math note number 1. Did you know that 2 plus 2 equals 4? It's true. Go ahead and click create. Okay, and then from their existing notes, they are free to make edits. They can click this to change the title. Click save. All of this gets saved into the database on the fly, and they can also delete one of their notes in real time. The other feature that basic logged in users get has to do with liking a professor. So maybe if I navigate to the Dr. Barks a Lot professor page, you'll notice this little heart box. Currently it says 1 to indicate that one other person has liked Dr. Barks a lot. And notice the heart is hollow, but if I click on it, the heart fills in to indicate that I personally have liked this professor, and you can see their like count went up by 1. And thanks to JavaScript and the REST API, all of this happens on the fly. So if I immediately decide that actually I don't like this professor, you can just click it again to toggle or remove your like. And all of this data is getting saved into the WordPress database. After this section of the course, I show you how to push or deploy your website live up onto the web so that the entire world can view it. And if you don't have a web hosting account to practice with, that's okay. This course gives you access to a free 3-month educational hosting plan, and it really is free in the truest sense of the word. You do not even need to enter a credit card or any form of payment, so there's no way they can automatically bill you at the end of the 3 months. Okay, so that way everyone has access to a web host, so you can practice deploying a site live. And it's not mandatory, but if you're familiar with the Git version control system, you are really going to love the automatic Git deployment setup that I can show you. And finally, we end the course with a few extra credit challenges. So there's the bird's eye view of the course. I'm really excited to get things rolling. My goal for this course is to give you lots and lots of small victories. Each time we finish a small little feature or section and things work the way we want them to, I want you to relish that small victory. Because each time we write code and accomplish something with it, we are moving closer to our career goals. And that's something to feel good about. So let's get some momentum rolling. Let's get things started, and most importantly, let's become a WordPress developer. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will answer the question, where do we begin? So whenever I'm helping someone learn WordPress development, I always say that the first step, our first priority, should be setting up a dev environment for ourselves so that we can work locally. Now don't worry, I do not expect you to know what that means. In order to explain what that means, let's ask ourselves 2 new questions. What in the world is a dev environment? And what does working locally mean? Let's start with the dev environment. The best way to explain what it is to begin with its opposite. The opposite of a dev environment is your real website that the entire world can see. So in the past, you might have purchased a domain name, like your own .com or .org, and you might have also purchased a web hosting plan and used WordPress to create a website. In the industry, we refer to that real website that the entire world can see, we refer to that as your live environment or your production environment. On the other hand, a dev or development environment is a separate copy of your website that is usually configured so that only the owner or developers of the website can see it. So a dev environment is a private, safe sandbox or playground to experiment in, and no one from the general public can see your work-in-progress website. Okay, so that's a dev environment. Now let's answer our other question, which is, what does working locally mean? So local is the opposite of the cloud. Local refers to your personal physical computer. So for example, right now I want you to picture 2 things. Number 1, your personal computer, and number 2, a server that lives 1,000 miles away from you. Now, the files that make up a website usually live on a server that a web host company maintains. The web host company leaves that server computer on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that people can access your website around the clock. And that means that WordPress and our websites usually live on a server, not on our personal computers. However, it is possible to install WordPress on our personal computers. And that will allow us to create WordPress websites even when we don't have an internet connection. Now granted, these won't be real websites because no one else can view them. It would be like saving a word processing file to the desktop of your computer. You're the only person in the world who can view that word processing file because it lives on your physical computer. Okay, but long story short, that process of working from your computer instead of connecting remotely to a server somewhere, that process is called working locally. Now, if we put these two things together, if we work locally within a dev environment, it creates the perfect conditions for coding custom websites. Because if we make a typo while coding, it won't be a big deal because no one will see the error messages except for us. Also, we won't need to constantly upload new files to a server because anytime we save a file on our computer, our local private websites are just immediately, instantly updated. And then, only when we're finished coding our website, only then do we push our files up to a real public web server for the whole world to see. Okay, so if we want to work locally, we need to install WordPress on our personal computers. But that's a bit trickier than it may sound. So here's a metaphor or an analogy for you. If we had a tree that we wanted to plant, we can't just throw that tree anywhere, right? We can't just throw the tree on cement and expect it to live and grow. A tree needs a particular environment. It needs an environment with soil, water, and sunlight. Well, it's the same thing with WordPress. We can't just plant WordPress anywhere on our computer. WordPress needs an environment with the following three things. Number 1, PHP. Number 2, Apache or Nginx. And number 3, MySQL or MariaDB. Now don't worry, I do not expect you to know what any of those things are. But for now, just know that our personal computers need to have these things in order for WordPress to run. Now, most computers do not come pre-installed with these things, so we need to go out and get them. But luckily, these three things are completely free. And there are lots of different tools out there that will automatically install all three of them for us. Right? So all of the tools listed on the screen right now, they are free and they all do the same thing. They give us the metaphorical soil, water, and sunlight that WordPress needs in order to run on our computer. So we don't need all of these tools, we just need one of them. Now, if you've dabbled with WordPress development in the past, you might already have one of these tools installed on your computer. If that's the case, you can keep using it. You do not need to install another one. But if you're brand new, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed with all of these choices. So right now, why don't we install Local by Flywheel together, step by step. This is my favorite tool of the bunch, and it's super easy to use. So in a new tab in your web browser, search for Local by Flywheel. As of this recording, the official URL is local.getflywheel.com. Okay, then go ahead and click the big free download button and proceed to download the software. You might have to enter your first name or an email address or basic info, but the software is completely free. You will not have to pay even a penny. The download file is a decent size, so it might take a while to download. You might need to go grab a coffee while you wait, but once the download completes, jump into your computer's downloads folder and go ahead and begin installing the program. The installation process should look something like this, and this could take up to several minutes, so be patient. When it completes, it should then give you this option to create a new site. Go ahead and click that. We need to give this new site a name. Just to follow along with the course, why don't you name it Fictional University? Personally, I've already created a site with that exact name, so just for this demo, I will say Amazing College. Let's click Continue. We can go ahead and use the preferred default options, so continue again. And here you get to choose your username and password. Just choose something that you can remember, and also enter your email address. Then go ahead and click Add Site. I'm not interested in setting up a default password right now, so I just click Not Now. And this might take a few minutes to complete, but when it does, we now have our own local dev environment copy of WordPress up and running on our personal computer. So you can just click this View Site button. If that's not available yet, you might just need to start your website up in the top right corner. But once it's up and running, just click View Site. And here we have a brand new, completely fresh copy of WordPress. Up in the address bar, you can see that it gave us our own fake local dev domain. It basically told our computer that if we visit this domain, instead of looking out onto the internet, just look within our own personal computer. And this means that you are the only one in the world that can view your website. If you shared this domain with a friend or family member, they would not be able to see your website yet. Cool, so you've got your own private playground copy of WordPress that you can experiment with. If you want to log in as the admin of the site, up in the address bar at the end of this domain, just add /wp-admin, press enter. Enter the username and password you chose just a moment or two ago. Cool, and here's your typical WordPress admin dashboard. Now let's pretend you've been working and experimenting for a while and you're done for the day. To shut things down, just jump back to the Local by Flywheel application. We can click Stop Site up in the top right corner. Okay, and then you're free to close the program. Now let's imagine it's the next day and you're ready to start working on your WordPress site again. Just open up Local by Flywheel. It could take several minutes to load, but once it does, just click on your website that you created here. Okay, and then in the top right corner, we just need to click Start Site. Cool, so now it's running again. So now back in your browser, you're free to use your website again. You might need to refresh. And remember that if you forget this URL, you can always just click View Site right here. Okay, now there's only one more super important thing that I need to tell you right now before we move on. I want to show you where on your computer your new website files actually live. So right here where you see your website listed, if you right click on that, if you're on a Mac, you can choose Reveal in Finder. If you're on Windows, it will say Show in Folder or something similar. Basically, we're looking for the folder or directory where the website lives. So click on that option, and that will show you the folder for the current website that you're working on. If you're wondering where this lives, it's inside your user account's home directory. If you're on a Mac, within your home folder, you will now see a brand new folder named Local Sites, right? And that contains our projects. If you're on Windows, you will have a new folder named Local Sites within the base of your main user folder. So it would be sitting alongside your Downloads folder. Okay, now before we bring this lesson to a close, I want to show you where the actual WordPress files themselves live. So within Local Sites, within our project folder, dig into App, and then Public, and here we are. We are going to be spending a lot of time in this folder in this course. These are the system files that actually power WordPress. Perhaps the most important folder is named WP-content. If you look inside it, we see another folder named Themes, and inside there is a folder for each theme that you have installed. Now in this course, we are going to be creating our own brand new theme. So very shortly, we will be setting up a new folder here, and that's where we are going to do a lot of our work. Now at this point, give yourself a pat on the back because you've completed the first step towards becoming a WordPress developer. You now have a local dev environment. But remember that not everyone in this course is using this same Local by Flywheel setup. So before we bring this lesson to a close, I just want to stress one thing to you, and that is that even if in future lessons my screen doesn't look exactly like your screen, that's okay. And even if I'm working in a slightly different folder, like personally in my case, my websites live on my desktop, right? In this lowercase local sites folder. That's not important. So just know that throughout the entire course, when you hear me say that I want you to jump to your project folder, or your WordPress folder, or your theme folder, just know that you are in the right spot. For you, I just want you to open up your project within your local sites folder, jump into it, then jump into app, then jump into public. Okay, this is really the only folder that you need to worry about throughout the entire course. I'm usually going to tell you things like, now I want you to jump into WP content. Cool. Now that's going to bring this lesson to a close, and now that you've set up a local dev environment for yourself, we can really start learning how WordPress works. In our very next lesson, we are going to get our first taste of PHP, which is the language that powers the heart and soul of WordPress. This is going to be a lot of fun, so let's keep things rolling, and I will see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will get our first taste of PHP, which is the language that WordPress is written in. Now, working with a programming language might sound intimidating at first, but that's why we're going to walk through this together, step by step at a nice pace. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, in our previous lesson, we set up a local dev environment copy of WordPress for ourselves. And now the question becomes, how and where can we get our first taste of the PHP language? Well, in our previous lesson, we also learned how to find the files and folders that power this site. So for example, if you're using local by Flywheel, you can just right-click on your site right here and choose Reveal in Finder. Or if you're on Windows, it should say Show in Folder or Open Explorer or something similar to that. Go ahead and click into that folder, then click into App, then click into Public, and these are the WordPress system files that power your site. Now, before you and I worry about doing anything useful, like maybe creating our own brand new theme, before we get to that, let's first start simple. For now, let's just create an experiment file in this folder where we can try a few simple tests and dip our feet into the PHP waters. Now, it's important to point out that you cannot use a word processing program to create a new PHP file or make edits to an existing PHP file. Instead, you need a dedicated text editor program. Now, most computers do not come with a text editor program out of the box. But luckily, 3 of the best text editors in the world are free to download and use. So if you don't already have a text editor program on your computer, I recommend you download one of the following 3. The first is Sublime Text. This is the text editor that I will be using throughout this course, so if you want to use the same program as me, this would be the choice for you. However, there are tons of different text editor programs out there, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. They will all work perfectly for editing PHP code. Okay, so aside from Sublime Text, another great option for a text editor program is Visual Studio Code. And another great free option is the Atom text editor. And again, you do not need to download all 3 of these. Any one of them will do the trick. So just pause the lesson right now and go ahead and download and install one of these 3 text editors. Okay, and at this point in the lesson, I will assume anyone watching now has a text editor ready to use. So go ahead and open up your text editor program. And if you don't already see an empty screen where you can begin typing, just click on File New. Or if you're on Windows, you can usually just press Control N. Or if you're on Mac, you can press Command N to get a new file. Okay, so in this blank canvas, why don't we type out, "This is a test." Okay, then let's go ahead and save this as a PHP file into our WordPress system folder. So click File Save or Control S or Command S, and we need to save this file into a very specific location. We want to save it into that folder where all of the WordPress system files live. So within your user account home folder, click into Local Sites, then click on the name of your site, then App, and then Public. Okay, and this is that same directory that we've already seen twice now with the different WordPress files and folders. So let's save our new file into this folder. And the name of our new file only matters in the sense that we don't want to overwrite any of the existing WordPress files. So why don't we name our new file experiment, and this is the important part, .php. So save it as experiment.php. Cool, so now in that same folder with all of the WordPress files, if I scroll down to the bottom, there is our brand new little experiment.php. Now let's try to view this in the web browser. So back in your browser, if you visit your local dev environment copy of WordPress, right, your URL might be a bit different. If you're using Flywheel, remember you can always use the View Site button. But at the end of this URL, add on, make sure there's a / and add on experiment.php. Press enter and you can see we are viewing that brand new file that we just created. Now I want to point out that this is not how you add new pages or URLs to a WordPress website. So you would never do this in the real world on a live public website. We are only doing this for educational and testing purposes. At the end of this lesson, we are actually going to delete our experiment.php file. However, for the time being, this is a great place to try and write our first bit of PHP code. So why don't we jump back into our text editor and let's delete the "this is a test" message, and instead let's write a tiny bit of HTML so we can then see how PHP fits into the equation. So just as a test, let's create a heading level 1 HTML element and say, this page is all about Brad. And then maybe right below that, I want a less important headline that reads, all about Brad. Okay, let's save this and refresh the page. All right, so nothing too exciting here. This is just a bit of HTML, a heading level 1 and a heading level 2. But remember, we are not editing an HTML file, we are editing a PHP file. So if this is just HTML, what does PHP look like and what can it do? Well, check this out. Maybe on a new line above this code, type this out with me. Less than symbol, question mark, PHP, and then a space, and then a question mark, and then greater than symbol. So what does this code mean? Well, this first chunk that I have highlighted right now, this begins PHP mode, and this chunk ends PHP mode. Okay, so in between those, where my cursor is right now, that means we are in PHP mode. Now, when we are not in PHP mode, like down here, right, because this closes PHP mode, this code down here is just regular old HTML. But up here, while we are in PHP mode, we can write magical, beautiful PHP code. So check this out. Type this out with me. Echo. Echo is how you output things to the page while you're in PHP mode. So echo, and then let's write 2 plus 2. Then let's save this and refresh in the browser. And there we see 4. Now you might be underwhelmed. You might be wondering what is so exciting about 2 plus 2 equals 4. Well, it's exciting because we could never do that in regular old HTML. HTML doesn't have a brain. You just type out exactly what you want and that's exactly what you get. PHP, on the other hand, has a brain. It is a legitimate programming language. We can give it equations, we can tell it to talk to databases, we can have it resize images or send out automatic emails. We can make PHP do just about anything for us. And what's cool is that the general public that's visiting our website, they don't see our PHP code. They only see the final product. So for example, here in the web browser, if we view the source of this page, so view page source, so here we can see the HTML code, but notice we don't see 2 plus 2, we just see 4. This is because PHP is a server-side language. And that means that all of our PHP code runs on the server, and then only the result of that code, not the code itself, gets sent to the visitors of our website. So in other words, the server is what's calculating 2 plus 2, not people's web browsers. Let's jump back into our text editor because practice makes perfect. I want to show you that we can jump in and out of PHP mode as many times as we need to. So for example, maybe after this heading level 1, but before this heading level 2, so maybe in between those two lines, I want to drop into PHP mode and maybe echo out the results of 5 times 5. Okay, and then I'll be sure to close out or end PHP mode. Okay, and if I save this and refresh, cool, so in between the two headlines we see 25. So back to the code, you can see that in a PHP file we can seamlessly jump back and forth between PHP, HTML, PHP, HTML. All right, now before we end this lesson, I want to have you type out one more PHP example. All right, so on this page you can see that my name is included twice, here and here. Now imagine I legally changed my name in the future. I would have to update my name in both places. Now just updating it in 2 spots isn't too bad, but imagine if the page listed my name 100 times or 300 times. Updating it in all of those places would be very time consuming. So it would be nice, instead of having to hard code my name, if we could just include a placeholder for my name, right? So for example, if instead of Brad right here, it just said blank, and instead of Brad right here, it said blank. And then we could somehow programmatically replace all of the blanks with my name. Well, there's no way to do that with regular old HTML, but we can do it with PHP. So check this out. Up here on this top line, right after 2 plus 2, while we are still in PHP mode, let's add a semicolon. The semicolon tells PHP that we are done with this task and that we want to move on to a new task. So we could begin typing right here where my cursor is, but just to stay organized, I'm going to drop down to a new line. Okay, and right now I'm still in PHP mode, and what I'm going to do right now is create a variable that stores my name. So type this out with me. $, my name equals, quote, Brad. And then just to be safe, why don't we add a semicolon at the very end of the line to tell PHP that we are done with this task. Now let's go over this code that we just wrote. So the $ symbol is how you create a variable in PHP. And then this text that comes right after the $ symbol, this doesn't matter what you type. I just made this up. There's nothing magical about my name. Instead, we could have typed unicorn or pizza. Right? It really doesn't matter what we type here, just as long as it's something we can remember. So this line of code basically creates a sticky note in PHP's memory with my name written on one side, and then on the back of that sticky note, it says Brad. Now what's cool is we can reference this throughout the rest of our page. So now, instead of literally typing out blank here, we can just use PHP to reference this my name variable. So let's delete this first blank. So this page is all about, and then we want to output whatever the value of my name is. So place our cursor here, and then we want to enter into PHP mode. Okay, and remember, echo is how we output something onto the page when we are in PHP mode. And then we just type out the variable name. So $ my name. Okay, and then let's be sure to close out of PHP mode. Cool, so on this line we start out with HTML, then we enter into PHP mode to get that variable value, then we close out of PHP, so then we're back into HTML mode so we can close out the headline. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for this line. So let's delete blank, and then instead of typing this out again, let's just copy and paste it. So select this PHP section, copy it, paste it right here. Okay, now if I save this and refresh, we don't see any difference because my name still equals Brad. But now if we change this variable to equal John Doe and save, cool, it gets updated in both locations. Now again, it's not very impressive because it's in only 2 locations, but imagine if your page was way more complex and that name was referenced hundreds of times. You get the idea. And that's actually going to bring this example to a close. Now, I do want to point out that what we just did in this lesson has absolutely nothing to do with WordPress. This experiment.php file that we just created is not in any way connected to the core of WordPress. However, WordPress is written in the PHP language. And at this point in the course, you are now familiar with the basics of PHP, right? You know how to enter PHP mode. You know how to close PHP mode. You know how to create variables using the $sign, and you know how to output content to the page using echo. And with just that little bit of PHP knowledge in your tool belt, you are now ready to start writing WordPress code. Or in other words, you're ready to use PHP to tell WordPress what to do. And this is where things get fun. So in our very next lesson, we are going to use PHP code to create our own brand new custom WordPress theme. But really quick, before we jump into that next lesson, I want to talk about our experiment.php file. If everything in this lesson made sense, I encourage you to actually go ahead and delete our experiment.php file. You don't need to delete it. You can keep it for reference if you'd like to. I just want to make sure that you're aware that it's not normal to have random extra files sitting in the core root folder of WordPress like this. We only did this for educational testing reasons, so I would strongly encourage you to delete this file, but it's not going to hurt anything, so if you want to keep it there for reference, that's okay. Anyways, I'm looking forward to creating a theme with you in the next lesson, so let's keep things rolling, and I will see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will begin creating our very own WordPress theme. Without further ado, let's jump right into the action. Okay, so in your web browser, go ahead and visit the home page of your local dev environment copy of WordPress. Your local domain might be different than the one you see on my screen right now. That's not important, but let's go ahead and visit the admin dashboard of our website. You can always visit the dashboard by going up to your address bar and at the end of your domain visiting /wp-admin. Go ahead and log in. Okay, and if we were not developers, one of the first things you do on a typical WordPress website is look for a theme that you like, right? So you might head over to the Appearance tab and switch to one of the other themes that WordPress comes with out of the box. Or most of the time, you don't want to be limited to just these themes that WordPress ships with. So instead, you might click Add New here. And then you could search through the thousands of free themes. Or your third main option is to use this Upload Theme button in case you purchased a premium theme from a third-party marketplace. Okay, but in this course, we are not going to do any of that because we are not going to use an existing theme. We are going to create a brand new theme. Now, I know at first that might sound scary, creating a theme from scratch, but it's not scary because I'm here to guide you through it step by step. And believe it or not, it's very simple to begin creating a new theme. So, for example, if I click on the main Appearance tab again, here we see all of our currently installed themes, and if we want to create a brand new theme that will show up on this screen, all we need to do is create a new folder in a very specific location. So let me show you what I mean. Let's go on a little bit of a trip. Let's look for the WordPress Themes folder. The first step to finding it is just navigating to that WordPress System folder we've already looked at 2 or 3 times. So navigating to that folder is a bit different depending on whether you're using Local by Flywheel, or MAMP, or Bitnami, or XAMPP, or Vagrant and VirtualBox, but let me walk you through the Local by Flywheel example. So right-click on your site, click Reveal in Finder, click into your folder, and then App, and then Public. Okay, now everyone in the course, regardless of what you're using for your local dev environment software, everyone is going to have these same core WordPress files. Now at the moment, we are looking for the themes folder, which is located in the WP Content folder. So click into WP Content, and here we see a folder named Themes. Let's look inside that folder, and here we see one folder for each of our currently installed themes, right? So this 2017 folder corresponds with the 2017 theme. So if we want to create a new theme, all we need to do is create a brand new folder in this themes directory. So new folder, and we can name it anything we'd like. Why don't we call it Fictional University Theme? Just something along these lines, doesn't have to be exact. Okay, now all we need to do is create 2 new files within this new folder, and then we will have a real theme that will show up on this screen and that we can activate. So let's go ahead right now and create the 2 files that we need. What I like to do is open this entire folder in our text editor. On Mac, I can just drag this folder into my dock onto my text editor program. Or once you're in your text editor program, you can just use File Open, and there should be an option to just open an entire folder instead of a file. Now you don't need to do it this way, I just find it convenient. Because now, in my text editor, here we have the sidebar of the folder, and I can just right-click on it and choose New File. So I have this completely empty screen, but now if I try to save this, my text editor automatically knows that I want to save it within that new theme folder that we just created. So what do we want to name this file? Well, let's call it index.php. Okay, and what do we want to write within the file? For now, let's just add a bit of placeholder text that reads, "This is our amazing custom theme." Save again. All right, so I said we needed to create 2 files, so we created one of the 2. Let's create the second file. So I will right-click on my Fictional University theme in the sidebar and click New File. Or you could just use your text editor's File, New File option. Let's save this. Okay, and what do we want to name this second file? Let's call it style.css. Now, normally, a CSS file only has one responsibility, and that's to tell the web page what it should look like. So you don't have to type this out because I'm just going to delete it in 5 seconds from now. But normally in a CSS file, you would say that like the color of all the text should be orange, right? You style the content on your page. Well, we will do stuff like that as well, but in WordPress, this style.css file has another responsibility. WordPress needs us to use this file to give it a bit of information about our theme. And the way that we give WordPress that info is up at the very top of the file here, we begin a CSS comment. So slash and then an asterisk. That's how you begin a CSS comment. And then on another line, to close out the comment, it's asterisk and a slash. Okay, now between those 2 lines, we can write whatever we want. So first and foremost, WordPress wants to know what the name of our theme is. So let's say theme name colon, and we don't need the semicolon at the end here. And now we can make up whatever name we want. So let's say Fictional University. You might think that we already named the theme when we created the folder name, but in folder names, you usually want to use dashes instead of spaces. So this is our chance to use capital letters and have spaces in the name. You get the idea. Now if we save this file, and I want to point out that it needs to be named style.css. It can't be main.css or screen.css. The name here is very important. WordPress is on the lookout for this specific file name in our theme folder. Okay, but with this comment in place and we save the file, if we jump back over to our admin dashboard and refresh the main appearance themes screen, here we see our brand new theme. And if we hover over it, we see theme details, and if we click on that, we can see it looks a bit odd, right? It says Fictional University and then version, and there's no version number. And also it says by anonymous instead of our name. So to fix those 2 things, back in our text editor, on a new line, still within our comment, we can say author Don't need the semicolon, but author colon, and then you can just type in your name here. And then on a new line, we can also say version, and then we can just make up a version number, maybe 1.0. Okay, so if we save this again and then refresh our theme screen and click on it again, cool. So now we see Fictional University version 1.0 by Brad. Now, all we are really missing is a screenshot or photograph or a preview image of our theme, right? You'll notice that all of the other themes have a preview image here. So to add a preview image to our new theme, all we need to do is go within our theme folder, right? I named that folder Fictional University Theme. And we just need to move an image file to live within this folder, and the file should be named screenshot.png. Now, I conveniently have a PNG file sitting on my desktop here. You can find this same image file in the resources for this lesson, but I'm just going to move this file into my folder, and then I'm going to rename the file to screenshot.png. Okay, because WordPress is on the lookout for this exact file name. And you can use your own image here instead of this one. Ideally, you want the photo to be 1200 pixels wide by 900 pixels tall. All right, but with this in place, if we refresh this admin screen again, cool. So now this looks like a legitimate theme. It's got a preview photo. If we click it, it's got the essential information. And now we can just go ahead and activate the theme. So you can click activate down here at the bottom, or if you close this out, from this screen, when you hover over a theme, there's also an activate button right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and activate the theme. And now, if we use this link up here to view the front end of our website, cool. So remember, this is what we typed out in our themes index.php file. So if we go back to our text editor and jump back into the themes index.php file, maybe I want to add the word completely here. This is our completely amazing custom theme. Save it, refresh our website. Awesome. So now that we have our brand new theme and we activated it, we can see it on the front end of our website here, we really don't have any need for all of these other default themes like 2017, 2016, right? Our new theme is all we are ever going to need. And since we don't want to ever accidentally activate one of these other themes, why don't we just go and delete them right now? So back to the folder structure. Here's our theme folder that contains index.php, style, and our screenshot. If we go up a level, okay, so now I'm looking in the WordPress themes folder, we can go ahead and delete the folders for those other themes, 2015, 16, and 17. So just select them and delete them. Cool, so now if I refresh this admin screen, perfect. We just have one theme and it's the one that we created. Now before we bring this lesson to a close, I want to address a CSS concern that you might have. So if you're the type of person who experiments with lessons along the way, you might have already tried to do the following. So back in our style.css file, underneath our comment lines, you might have tried to write a bit of normal CSS. So maybe you would target the entire page and say color orange. But you'll notice that if I save that and refresh the website, nothing happens. We would expect this text to become orange, but that's not happening. So don't worry, I don't expect the CSS to be loading yet. I will show you how to correctly load the CSS on the front end of your website very soon. Okay, now having said that, looking forward to our very next lesson, we will learn how to do something actually useful here instead of just this boring placeholder sentence. We are going to look at the heart and soul of WordPress and PHP, which is functions. If you have no idea what a function is, that's okay. That's actually good, because in the next lesson we are going to start with the very basics. It should be a lot of fun. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will answer the question, what is a function? Instead of trying to explain with words what a function is, let me show you visually what a function is. So let's jump into our text editor and open up the index.php file that lives in our theme folder. Let's try to write some new code here together. So delete this sample line of text, and then let's drop in or enter into PHP mode. So remember from our first Taste of PHP lesson, to enter PHP mode, it's less than symbol, question mark, PHP. And then maybe down on this line, let's close out of PHP mode. So question mark, greater than symbol. And then in between those two lines, so where my cursor is now, we are free to write PHP code. So remember from a lesson or two ago, we tried echoing out a math problem, right? We could say echo 2 plus 2. So if I go ahead and save this and then refresh my website, fictionaluniversity.dev, here we see the answer, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, so that should jog our memory of working with PHP. Now, let's have our first look at a function. So let's delete this line and let's create our very own first function. We don't even know what a function is yet, but let's create one. So write out the word function and then a space, and then we can make up a name for our function. Why don't we call it my first function? Right? The name doesn't really matter. It's up to us to choose a name. And then right after that, we don't even need a space. Let's just open up a pair of parentheses. And then after the open and close parentheses, let's add a pair of curly brackets. These are the same curly brackets that you use in CSS. So you just hold down the Shift key and then press the key to the right of your P key. Okay, and in between the two curly brackets, I like to drop down to a new line just to stay organized. Okay, and in between the curly brackets, let's write out our echo 2 plus 2 again. Now if I save this and refresh the browser, we do not see the number 4. We don't see anything. It's just a completely blank page. And that's because this code here that we wrote is a function definition. So really all we did here with this code is we took the task of adding 2 plus 2 and we gave it a name, my first function. So a function definition like we have here doesn't actually do anything. It's just a description of an action or a task. In order to actually run this function, right, and actually evaluate 2 plus 2, what we can do is below this function definition, so maybe on a new line, like right here, we just type out the name of the function, so my first function, and then include parentheses, and let's include a semicolon at the end of that line. And now if we save and refresh, we do see 4. So this is how you define a function. It's like the recipe for the action that you want to take. And then this is how you actually run or call or use the function. Now what's cool is you can use the function again and again and again. You can recycle that recipe. So we could say it again, my first function. Save it, refresh it, and now we see a second 4. This is a little bit confusing because it looks like 44, but really it's just the number 4 and then there's no spacing and then the number 4 again. So let's try something a little bit clearer. Up in our function, instead of echo 2 plus 2, let's delete that, and instead let's say echo out a string of text. So give me double quotes, and then let's create an HTML paragraph tag, right? So the opening and closing tag, and in between them, let's say, hello, this is my first function. And let's be sure to add a semicolon at the very end of this line to let PHP know that we are done with this action. Okay, and now if we save this and refresh, cool, we see it twice because we are calling the function twice down here. So you only have to define a function once and then you can use it and reuse it as many times as you want. So if I copied this and pasted it again, so there's 3 of them, obviously we see it 3 times. Okay, so now that we've learned how to create a function and then run or call the function, let's go ahead and delete all of this and try something a little bit more advanced. So first, let's give ourselves a goal. Let's imagine that we want to create these 2 paragraphs. Hi, my name is John and my favorite color is blue. And hi, my name is Jane and my favorite color is green. Now, when I say that we want to create these 2 paragraphs, I don't mean just type them out like we see here. Instead, what I mean is because these 2 lines are so similar to each other, and the only unique parts are the names and the colors, why don't we try to create a single function that can generate both of these paragraphs? So let me delete these and try this out with me. Up here in our PHP area, let's create a new function. So to do that, we just spell out the word function and then a space, and now we make up a name for the function. Why don't we call it greet? Okay, and then right after that, we don't even need a space. Open up a pair of parentheses. And then after the parentheses, let's open up a pair of curly brackets. And then in between the opening and closing curly brackets, let's drop down to a new line. And then let's echo or output a bit of text. So we want to wrap our text in double quotes. Okay, so in between those quotes, let's just begin an HTML paragraph tag. And then let's close it out. And in between those, we will say, "Hi, my name is blank, and my favorite color is blank." And then at the very end of this line, let's be sure to end it with a semicolon. Okay, and now right below our function definition here, so down here, let's just call or run the function once for John and once for Jane. So greet, parentheses, semicolon, that will run it once, and then let's just run it a second time. So if I save this and refresh in the browser, cool, we see the two paragraphs. So now all we need to do is find a way to pass information about John from this function call into the function itself, right? Because we don't want it to say blank and blank. So check this out. When we call the function for the first time, in between the parentheses, let's say John. And let's do the same thing for Jane. So in between these parentheses, let's say Jane. Okay, now back up in our function definition, within these parentheses, let's add a dollar symbol and let's say name. Remember from an earlier lesson that the dollar symbol is how you create a variable in PHP. This isn't a special word, I just made it up. We could have said unicorn or pizza. Okay, the name doesn't matter, but for now let's just call it name because that makes sense, right? John and Jane are names. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a variable of sorts that we can use within the meat and potatoes of this function. So we can use this dollar symbol name variable wherever we see fit. So all we need to do now is just remove this blank, right? We don't want that. And let's replace it with dollar symbol name. Okay, now before I explain what's going on here and give you the technical names of what we're doing, let's just go ahead and save this and test it out. So if I refresh in the browser, cool. Hi, my name is John and my favorite color is blank. Hi, my name is Jane and my favorite color is blank. So let's review what's going on here. And let's build up our vocabulary. So when we call the function down here twice, this little bit of data named John and this little bit of data named Jane, those are called arguments. And within a single function call like this, you can include multiple arguments. So check this out. Right after the John and quote, let's add a comma and say blue, right? Because blue was his favorite color. Let's do the same thing for Jane. So after this first argument of her name, let's add a comma and include another argument. Her favorite color was green. Okay, so if we are calling a function and giving it two arguments, we better make sure that up in our function definition, we are ready for two parameters. Think of a parameter as a hollowed out variable or a little container that can receive the incoming arguments. So we already have a parameter to receive the incoming name. So right after that, let's add a comma, and then let's just say $color. Again, the parameter name doesn't really matter. You can make it up. You can use whatever name you want. Okay, but what's important is that now we can use $color within the body of this function. So let's go ahead and delete this second blank here, and let's replace it with $color. Let's save this and refresh. Cool, so we see my favorite color is blue and my favorite color is green. Okay, so that's how you can create your own function and use parameters to receive the incoming arguments so that your function can be flexible. Okay, now let's change gears and bring this full circle. Let's tie it back to WordPress. So the beauty of WordPress is that it comes bundled with tons of its own pre-built functions that we can leverage. Right? So WordPress has already created and defined lots of functions, and then we just get to come along and run or call or use those functions. So for example, down here, once we are out of PHP mode, right? So this line closes PHP mode. So down here in regular old HTML mode, let's imagine that we want to create a large HTML headline, and we want the contents of this headline to be our website's overall name or title. Well, WordPress has a function that will give us our website's name. So check this out. In between the H1 tags, let's drop into PHP mode, okay, and then let's exit PHP mode, okay, but in the middle of those two, let's run or call a WordPress function named blog info. Okay, so this is a function that has already been created and defined by WordPress. And what this function can do is give us all kinds of information about our website. And within these parentheses, we just provide an argument to tell WordPress what little bit of info in particular we are looking for. So single quotes, and let's say name. We want the name or title of our website. And let's add a semicolon right after that, just to tell PHP that we are done with this task. Okay, and if we save this and refresh, cool, we see the name of our website. Now, in case you're wondering where this is coming from, let's hop over in a new tab into the admin dashboard of our WordPress website. And towards the bottom of this left-hand sidebar, hover over Settings and then choose General. Okay, so see this first field named Site Title? That's the name of our website. So if we change this from Fictional University to Amazing University, and then scroll down and click Save, now if we refresh the front end of our website, we see that name change reflected. Cool. So this function, blog info, we didn't create or define this function. WordPress creates it for us, and then we just get to leverage it. Now the cool part is that we don't need to understand how WordPress goes and talks to the database to dynamically find the name of our website. WordPress abstracts away all of those technical database details, so we don't have to worry about it. All we have to do is run this convenient function. Okay, and that's really the heart and soul of 95% of custom WordPress development. It's just a matter of knowing the WordPress functions that are at our disposal and then running them in the right place at the right time. Let's try one more example before we close out this lesson. So let's imagine that below this headline, we want to include a paragraph that includes our website's slogan or tagline or description. In case you're wondering what I'm talking about, back in the admin dashboard, on this general settings screen, we see that the second field is named tagline. So by default, WordPress sets this to just another WordPress website, but we could change this to the best university in the world. Okay, and then scroll down and save that. Okay, and then back in our code, if we want to dynamically output that tagline in between the paragraph tag, let's just drop into PHP mode and close out. But in the middle, let's call that blog info function again. And then we can give it an argument to tell it which piece of information in particular we want it to return. And we will say description. Let's add a semicolon here, and then let's save this and refresh. Cool, there's our slogan or tagline. And now, if in the future we ever change the tagline from the WordPress admin area, so if I change this to, "We are pretty good," and then save it, our front-end website will automatically always display that value. Okay, so now at this point, we are at least a little bit familiar with what a function is, and now there's only one more topic we need to go over before we can start doing powerful, actually useful WordPressy things. And that topic is arrays. So what in the world is an array? Well, that's exactly what we are going to cover in our next lesson. I'll give you a hint right now though. Understanding arrays is what's going to let us start displaying actual dynamic WordPress content on the front end of our website. Things like posts and pages. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will answer the question, what is an array? So for starters, even outside the context of programming, we might hear a car dealership say that a car is available in a wide array of colors. Okay, so let's think of an array as a collection. Now with that in mind, let's jump right into the code. So here I am in the index.php file that lives in our theme folder. And why don't we go ahead and delete all of this test code from our previous lesson. And let's try something new. So if we think back to that first Taste of PHP lesson, you'll remember that we learned how to create a variable. So let's try that again. So I will go into PHP mode. Down here I will close out of PHP mode. And then to create a variable, you just use the $sign. And maybe I want to create a variable that stores my name. So equals Brad. This variable name isn't special. I just made it up. It could be unicorn or pizza. Okay, but the idea here is that I'm setting this variable to have a value of Brad. And now I can use that variable anywhere else on the page. So maybe down here, once I am back in HTML mode, I could create a paragraph that says, hi, my name is, and then maybe drop into PHP mode so I can echo out that my name variable. Okay, and then close out the sentence with a period, and then close out the HTML paragraph tag. Okay, so if I save that and test it, hi, my name is Brad. So this is an example of a very simple variable that only contains one single little bit of data, right? Just one single name. However, what if we wanted to store multiple names within a single variable? So that's where arrays come into the picture. So check this out. Let's start over again. So let's go into PHP mode. And let's imagine that I want to create a variable named names, right? Plural. Now the name of the variable doesn't matter. So this could be pizzas. Doesn't matter. I just chose names to try to indicate that I want to store multiple values, right? Plural. So what does our variable equal? Well, we can say array. Okay, and now within these parentheses, right after the word array, we can store as many names as we want. So check this out. I could say Brad, comma, John, comma, Jane, comma, meows a lot. You get the idea. I can store as many names as I want. So in PHP, an array is a special type of data. An array is a collection of multiple values. Okay, and let's imagine that down here in HTML mode, I want to access one of these names. So maybe I have an HTML paragraph tag, and I want to say, hi, my name is blank, right? So I would drop into PHP to access our variable. So I want to echo out something that lives in the names variable. Okay, and then to look inside the array or look inside the collection, right here we can use square brackets. On your keyboard, this is directly right of the P key. Okay, now let's say, for example, that I want to access the first value in this array, so Brad. I would just include a 0 within the square brackets. You might think that it would be a 1 to access the first item, but it's actually a 0. In most programming languages, PHP included, arrays are 0-based, meaning the first item is 0 instead of 1. So for example, if I wanted to access the second value of John, I would include a 1 here. If I wanted Jane, a 2. If I wanted meows a lot, a 3. Okay, so if I save this and refresh, cool, we see my name is meows a lot. If I change it back to a 2, right, so 0, 1, 2, we should see Jane. Cool. But now the question is, why? Why would we do this? Why would we want to store multiple values in a single variable? What is the point of doing this? What is the advantage of doing this? Well, there are several reasons, but probably the biggest reason is for something called looping. So what in the world is looping? What is a loop? Well, let's imagine we want to do something once for each item in this collection. So let's imagine we wanted to output this sentence of hi, my name is blank. We wanted to do that once for each item in the collection. So technically we could just copy and paste this line and have it 4 times and then change this to 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So if I save this, that technically works, but this is terrible code. This is really repetitive, and it's just not an efficient way of doing things. Instead, what we can do is leverage the power of an array and programmatically loop through the collection and do something once for each item. So check this out. Let me show you what I mean. But actually, before we worry about outputting these names, let's just practice a very basic loop first. So let's give ourselves a goal. For whatever reason, let's imagine we want to output a bulleted list on the page that counts to 100. right? So imagine we want to create an HTML list item in a series of them, something like this that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 100. So it would take a long time to type that out by hand, but programming and loops make that very easy to do. So check this out. Back up here, while we are still in PHP mode, let's use something called a while loop. So while parentheses, and then right after that, curly brackets. Okay, so how does the while loop work? Well, whatever lives within the curly brackets will happen again and again and again until whatever we place in these parentheses evaluates to false. So let me show you what I mean. Right above this while loop, let's create a variable named count. The name doesn't matter, I'm just choosing count. And let's set it to equal 1. Now remember, our goal is to output a bulleted list that counts to 100. So within our parentheses, let's say that as long as the following thing is true, keep looping. So in the parentheses, we'll say, as long as our count is less than 100, keep doing whatever we tell it to do within these curly brackets. So then in the curly brackets, let's just echo out an HTML list item. Okay, and in that list item, we don't want to hard code a value of 1 or 2 or 3. Instead, let's output our count variable. Okay, so we are saying that count begins with a value of 1. So then the first time that the while loop runs, this will echo out a 1. And then right after this line, let's just increment or increase the count variable. So we can say count plus plus, and that will add 1 to it. So 1 plus 1 is 2, so now count equals 2. So then the while loop will run again, and it will say, okay, now the count equals 2. That's still less than 100, so this will evaluate to true. So then this will run again. So then it will output 2, then it will add 1 to that, right? So then count will equal 3, so on and so forth. So this will just keep repeating until finally count will equal 100, and then the while loop will say, hey, 100 is not less than 100. So then this will evaluate to false, and then the while loop will finally end. I know that's a lot to absorb, so you might need to re-watch this a few times, or pause the lesson and experiment with a while loop yourself. But if I save this and refresh, cool, we see a list that counts all the way, actually to 99 instead of 100. So back in our code, let's just change this to less than 101. Cool, so now it counts all the way up to 100. All right, so now that we've seen a relatively simple while loop in action, let's try something a tiny bit trickier. So let's delete the while loop and our count variable, and let's get back to the task at hand. Remember, we want to loop through our array of names and do something once for each item in the collection. So maybe output a sentence that says, hi, my name is blank. All right, so here's how we can do that. Let's use a while loop again. So while parentheses and then curly brackets. Okay, and we are going to need a count variable again. So let's create a variable and name it count. And this time, let's set it to equal 0 instead of 1, right? Because arrays are 0 based. In order to access the first item in the array, we use a 0. Okay, so down in our while loop, within the curly brackets, what we want to do for each item in the collection is just echo out an HTML list item that says, hi, my name is blank. Okay, so we remember from about 5 minutes ago, in order to access one of these items, we just use the variable name, right? They all live in the variable of names. And then to look inside the array, you use square brackets. So to access the first item, it's a 0. To access the second item, it's a 1. Okay, so we don't want to hard code a number here. Instead, we want to use our count variable. So in between the square brackets, let's just say count. Okay, so the first time the loop runs, it will be a 0. And then let's be sure to increment the count. So on the new line, let's say count plus plus. So then the next time the loop runs, count will equal 1. So that will give us John. Then it will increment again to 2, which will give us Jane. You get the idea. So now we just need to tell the while loop how many times it should repeat itself, right? So within these parentheses, we will say as long as the following thing is true, So let's say as long as count is less than, and now you might think that we would just say 4, right? Because there are 4 items in the array. But we don't want to hard code a number here, because what if in the future we added a 5th name to the collection? Barks a lot. Okay, so we don't want to have to babysit this code and keep updating this number here. So instead, what we can do is have PHP count the number of items in the array for us. So we'll say as long as count is less than, and then we can use the PHP tool named count, and then open up a pair of parentheses. Okay, and then in those parentheses, we just give it the name of our variable, right? Names is the variable that contains the array. So PHP will automatically count it and say, yep, there are 5 items in the array. So as long as count is less than 5, this will just keep happening again and again and again. So let's save this and refresh. Awesome. Now, if this is not your first time programming and you've worked with arrays before, you might be yelling at the screen right now saying, Brad, why on earth would you use a while loop here when you could have used a for each loop? Well, that's a great question with an even better answer. I want us to be familiar with the while loop because that's what WordPress uses to loop over real content like posts and pages. Right? So instead of this hypothetical worthless list of names here, imagine if we had an array or a collection of blog posts, and we wanted to loop through those blog posts and display them on the front end of our website for our visitors. Well, that is exactly what we are going to do in our very next lesson. It's probably going to be the most fun we've had in the course so far. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson we will learn about the famous loop in WordPress. Before we worry about what that means, let's first give ourselves a goal. So let's imagine that on the home page of our website, we want to output our most recent blog posts. Now before we dig into any code, let's first make sure that we have more than one blog post to work with. So let's jump over to our admin dashboard. And from the sidebar, let's click on Posts. So at the moment, I just have the one single Hello World demo post. But let's go ahead and create a few dummy posts right now, just so we have multiple posts to work with. So for the title, let's just say Test Post. And then you can just type out a bit of gibberish or paste in some lorem ipsum. Doesn't matter, but go ahead and click Publish. And why don't we create at least one more dummy post? So add new, I will call it second test post, add a bit of dummy content, and go ahead and publish again. Okay, so now if I click on posts from the admin sidebar, you can see that I have 3 posts. So now we can go ahead and learn how to output those blog posts onto our home page here. Let's go ahead and jump over to our text editor program. And in our theme folder's index.php file, let's delete all of this test code from our previous lesson. Okay, so we've got a clean slate. Let's go ahead and jump into PHP mode. And then let's create a while loop. Okay, so the word while, and then a pair of parentheses. And then right after that, a pair of curly brackets. Okay, so this is our empty skeleton of a while loop. And now, remember in our previous lesson, we had to do all sorts of things like create a count variable and manually increment that count, and then come up with our own logic like if count is less than a certain number. Well, this time around, we don't have to do any of that. We are no longer trying to work with hypothetical lists of names. Now we are trying to work with real WordPress content. And WordPress gives us the exact tools and functions to do that without breaking a sweat. So within the while loop parentheses here, all we need to do is use a special WordPress function named have_posts. And remember, to call or run a function, you include a pair of parentheses. So forget about programming. This almost makes sense just from an everyday English standpoint. How many times do we want to repeat or run this loop? Well, keep looping as long as or while we still have posts to loop through. Okay, and then within the curly brackets, what do we want to do once for each blog post? Well, before we try to output the title or the content of a post, first we need to call a WordPress function named the_post. This is a WordPress function that we can call and leverage, and it does several important things for us. Remember in our previous lesson we had that count variable? Well, we don't need to do that now because this the_post function will keep track of which post we are currently working with. So each time our while loop runs, this the_post function will tell WordPress to get all of the relevant information about the next post ready for us to use. So check this out. Right after this the_post and then a semicolon, why don't we drop out of PHP, and then on this line where we are closing the curly bracket, let's drop back into PHP. And what this does is now in between those two lines where my cursor is now, we are still within the while loop, but now we are in HTML mode. So let's go ahead and create a heading level 2 HTML element. And inside the headline, if I say hello and then save this and refresh, we see 3 hellos because we have 3 blog posts. Now obviously it's not very useful to just say hello. Instead, we probably want to output the title of each blog post. Now watch how easy this is. In between the headline, let's drop into PHP. And now we can use a WordPress function that is conveniently named the_title. Okay, so we just call this function. Let's save this and refresh. Cool, we've got the title for each post. Next, let's try to output the body content for each post right below the title. So back in our code, underneath this H2, let's just drop down to a new line. And I want to call a PHP function, so let's go back into PHP mode. And you might be able to guess the name of the function that we want to run. Its name is the_content. Semicolon. Okay, and then maybe right below this line, why don't we add an HTML horizontal rule just to create some sort of visual separation between each of the 3 posts. In the real world, we would use CSS to accomplish that, but this is a quick and dirty solution. So let's save this. Looks good. Let's give ourselves another goal. Let's imagine that whenever we click on one of the headlines, we want to be taken to a details screen for just that one single particular post. So if we want to turn the headlines into links, if you've ever worked with HTML before, you know that we just want to wrap this content here in A tags. Okay, so right before the title, let's open up an HTML A tag. And then right after the title gets output, let's close that A tag. Okay, and then in HTML, you give the opening A tag an attribute named href. And this tells the web browser where it should go when someone clicks on the link. So the question becomes, what do we want to type within these quotes? What URL do we want to send the visitor to? Well, you might have guessed it, but WordPress has a function that will output the perfect URL here. So within the quotes, let's drop into PHP, and then let's call a function named the_perm, as in permanent, permalink. Parentheses, because we're calling the function. Okay, let's go ahead and save this and test it out. Cool, so the headlines look like links, and if I click on this first one, I'm taken to a screen with only that one single post. And more importantly, notice the URL up here in the address bar. WordPress automatically knows what data to query from the database based on the URL that we visit, right? So this is the permalink or slug for second blog post. So WordPress knows to fetch or query just that post from its database. Back on the home page, when we are simply at fictionaluniversity.dev, in this case, by default, WordPress will query or fetch your 10 most recent posts when you're on the home page. But if we go to one of these detail screens for just a single blog post, WordPress will see the permalink or slug in the URL. It will only fetch or query that one post, and that way when we try to loop over all of the current posts, there will only be one single post to loop through. Okay, let's give ourselves another goal now that we are on this single detail screen for just one post. For example, it doesn't make much sense for this headline to still be a link, right? Because we are already on the detail screen for this post. There's no reason to click this again. So the question becomes, how do we let that remain a link while we are on the home page, while removing the link once we get to a single detail page? Well, check this out. Back in our text editor, I want you to create a brand new file in our theme folder. So new file, let's name this new file single.php. And within the new file, let's just type out a bit of random dummy text like hello123. And if we save this and refresh, here we see that dummy text when we are on the URL for a single post. But if we go back to our home page, we see that it is still powered by index.php. So what this means is that depending on the current URL, WordPress will be on the lookout for different file names in our theme folder. So our home page uses index.php, but then if we click on one of these single posts, WordPress will look within our theme folder for a file specifically named single.php. If that file doesn't exist, then WordPress will use index.php as a universal default fallback. Okay, but having said all of that, let's get back to the task at hand. Remember, on this screen, we just want to show the blog post title and the content, but we don't want the title to be a link like it is on the home page. So here's what we can do. Back in our text editor, let's go back into our index.php file, and let's select and copy the entire contents into our clipboard, and then let's go back into single.php, and let's delete this dummy text and then paste in our clipboard. And now let's simply remove the A tags that surround the title. So let's delete the closing tag and let's delete the opening tag here. And now let's go ahead and save and refresh. Cool. So now on the home page, each headline is a link, but then once you click on one of those, since you're already on the detail screen, there's no need for the headline to be a link. Cool. And we can adjust our single.php file further to maybe remove this horizontal rule line because there's no need to separate the content from anything below it. So back in our text editor, let's delete that HR element. Perfect. Okay, now at this point, let's change gears. So far in this lesson, we've been working with posts, but WordPress also has pages. So for example, let's jump back into the WordPress admin dashboard. And in the left-hand sidebar, let's click on Pages. And we could try to work with this sample page, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page, why don't we use the Add New button to create a new page. Let's give it a dummy title like Test Page 123. And then for the content, let's just include a bit of dummy lorem ipsum text. Then go ahead and publish or save the page. Okay, and now you'll notice this permalink here. You can always click this to preview the page. Cool, so that takes me to a screen with only the content for that one page. And if we look in the URL bar, we can see the slug for that page. However, even though this screen only displays information for that one single page, we see that the headline is still a link, which means that this URL and this screen is being powered by index.php instead of single.php. And that's because WordPress only uses the single.php file for individual posts. For individual pages, WordPress looks in our theme folder for a file named page.php. So why don't we go and create that file right now? So back in our theme folder, let's create a new file. Let's name it page.php. And instead of typing out the loop code again, why don't we just go into single.php, copy all of this into our clipboard, and then paste that into the new page.php. And just to prove to ourselves that this is indeed the file being used, maybe right above this heading level 2, why don't we create a heading level 1 that says, "This is a page, not a post." Let's save this, refresh. Cool, so we see this, which proves that we're using page.php. Here's the title and the content. If we go back to just fictionaluniversity.dev homepage, this is powered by index.php. And if we click on one of the blog posts, this screen is powered by single.php. So the important concept for this lesson is that depending on the URL you visit, WordPress is going to use different files in your theme folder to control what you see on the screen here. And even though we have these different files like page, index, and single, they all have one very important thing in common, and that is that they all use the famous loop, which is this general pattern of doing something once for each item in a collection, even if that collection only has one item in it. Okay, but in the WordPress universe, the loop is a famous term. Any WordPress developer will know what you're talking about if you mention the loop. The loop is at the heart and soul of WordPress, and it's something that we will use again and again throughout this course. Now that's actually going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we will learn how to create a global or universal header and footer. Should be a lot of fun. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will learn how to set up a global header and footer. If you don't know what I'm referring to, let me show you. So here's the home page that we set up in our previous lesson. And on most websites, you're going to want some sort of header area that appears on every page of the website. Same thing with the footer area. So if you want to add content at the very top and bottom of your pages, your first instinct might be to go into your index.php file in your theme folder and just add something up at the very top. So even before the opening PHP tag, you can include an HTML headline that says, "This is the header area." And for the footer, down at the very bottom, after the closing PHP tag, we could say, HTML paragraph, "This is the footer area." And if I save this and refresh the home page, cool, we have a header and a footer. So that works, but it's not ideal because we want this same identical header on every single page of the site. But we know from last lesson that index.php doesn't power every page on our website. So for example, if we click on one of the blog posts, we lose our header and footer because this screen is powered by single.php. And don't forget about page.php, which powers individual pages instead of posts. So long story short, if we wanted this header and footer on every page, we would have to duplicate or copy and paste this code into multiple different template files. Now duplicating code like that is almost always a bad practice because then if in the future, maybe a week from now, we want to change something in the header, we don't want to have to make that change in 5 or 10 or 20 different template files. Instead, we want our header code to live in just one file, right? We want a single source of truth. So check this out. Right now, I want you to create a new file in your theme folder. So new file, and let's name this new file header.php. And in this new file, let's write out a bit of dummy text. So maybe an HTML headline that says, "Greetings from header.php." All right, let's save this and then jump back into index.php. And let's delete this headline that we set up a couple of minutes ago. And instead, let's write a bit of code that will pull in the contents of header.php. So let's enter into PHP mode and then call a WordPress function named get_header. And remember to call a function, you include parentheses right after it, semicolon. And we could close out of PHP here, but because we are just going to drop right back into PHP for all of this code, why don't we just get rid of this closing tag and also get rid of this opening tag? So that way we just stay in PHP mode. Anyways, back to the task at hand, this getHeader function will pull in the contents of header.php. So if we save this and refresh the home page, cool, we see greetings from header.php. Next, let's do the same thing for our footer. So back in our text editor, let's create a new file in the theme folder. Let's name this new file footer.php. In this file, let's write out a bit of dummy text. So maybe a paragraph that says, "Greetings from footer.php." Save this, and then back in our homepage index.php file, let's replace this down here with code that will dynamically pull in the contents of the footer file. So we could drop into PHP mode down here, or we could just write this code up here while we are still in PHP. You can probably guess the name of the WordPress function we want to use, get_footer. Okay, with that in place, if we save, cool, greetings from footer.php. And if we click on one of the blog post links, we do not see the header or footer, but all we need to do is go into single.php and call those getHeader and getFooter functions. So back in the text editor, let's jump into our single.php file. And right before the while loop, let's say getHeader. All right, and then right after the curly bracket that closes the while loop, let's say getFooter. Let's save that. And now our single post screen is in business. So that takes care of individual posts. Let's not forget about individual pages. Remember in our WordPress admin dashboard, if we click on pages in the sidebar, in our previous lesson, we created this dummy page, test page 123. And if I use this view link here to preview it, this screen is powered by page.php. So let's go ahead and jump into our text editor and hop into page.php. And let's pull in our global header and footer. So get header, and down here below the curly bracket, get footer. Cool. So now whenever we update header.php or footer.php, we can rest assured that our entire website globally will be updated. Now before we bring this lesson to a close, I have two more tasks for us that are directly related to the header and footer. First, let's learn how to load our CSS file on the front end of our website. And secondly, let's learn how to add the black admin menu bar that's supposed to sit at the top of our website globally. You can see the menu bar I'm referring to if you jump over to the WordPress admin screens, but that bar should also be on the front end of our website while we are signed in. Okay, but let's start with our first task of actually loading our CSS file on the front end of our website. If you've worked with HTML in the past, you probably already know how to load a CSS file, right? You include it towards the top of your HTML file in the head section. So to get started, let's jump into our text editor and open header.php, and let's delete this dummy text and start fresh. Let's begin with the basic skeleton of an HTML document. Right? So you always begin with the doc type, and then right below that you create an HTML sandwich, and then within that you have two sandwiches, the head sandwich and the body sandwich. So within the body section is where you include your actual content, right? So maybe you'd have a headline that says fictional university. All right, but back to the task at hand. The head section is usually where you load your CSS file. Only in WordPress, instead of manually including our CSS file using link, instead of doing that, in WordPress we just call a PHP function named WP_head. And this lets WordPress be in control of our head section. So imagine down the road we install a few WordPress plugins, and maybe those plugins need to load CSS files of their own. So this function lets WordPress have the final say and load whatever it needs to load in our head. All right, now with this line of code in place, all we need to do is programmatically tell WordPress to load our CSS file. And the way that we do that is by creating a brand new file in our theme folder. And let's name this new file functions.php. Now, this new functions file is a bit different from all of the other files we've been creating so far. All of our other files are what we might call template files, right? They control the HTML that the general public will see on our website. Well, think of this functions.php file as a bit more private. This is our behind the scenes file. This is where we can have a conversation with the WordPress system itself. All right, but back to the task at hand. We want to tell WordPress to load our CSS file. So within this functions.php file, let's open up PHP and then call a WordPress function named add_action. This is a super useful WordPress function that we will use again and again throughout the course. Within these parentheses, this function wants us to give it 2 arguments. So for example, quotes and then A quotes B. Now obviously we're not going to pass it an argument of A and B. I'm just including these as placeholders, okay? Now let me explain what this function actually does. So WordPress lets us give it instructions and tell it what to do by using this add action function. The first argument is where we tell WordPress what type of instructions we are giving it. Depending on what we are trying to do, WordPress will run this code at different times. In this case, we want to load a file. So the special WordPress hook name that we want to hook onto is WP_onQ_scripts. Okay, and the name here definitely matters. You need to spell it exactly right or WordPress won't know what you're trying to do. All right, so this is our way of saying, hey WordPress, I want to load some CSS or JavaScript files. And then this second argument, instead of B, let's delete that. And what we do here is give WordPress the name of a function that we want to run. And it's important to point out that this is going to be a function that we create and define in about 10 seconds from now. So in this case, we need to make up a name. Why don't we name our function fictional university resources or fictional university files? How about university_files? Okay, for this argument, the name doesn't matter. It just needs to be something that makes sense to you personally and that you can remember. All right, now right above this line, why don't we create a function with this exact name? So we will say function, and then spell out that name, university_files, parentheses, and then we are defining or creating the function, so then curly brackets. And now within these curly brackets, within the body of this function, we can load as many CSS or JavaScript files as we want. For now though, we just want to load one CSS file, right? Our main style.css. So we will call a WordPress function named WP_onQstyle. And within the parentheses, this function is looking for 2 arguments. For the first, we just need to make up a nickname for our main style sheet. This name does not matter. It just needs to make sense to us. Why don't we call it University Main Styles? Okay, and then the second argument is just a location that points towards the file. Later on in this course, we will learn how to point towards custom folder directories and look up specific file names. But in this case, since we just want to work with the main style.css file, and that's sort of the default style sheet in WordPress, we don't need to manually spell out a location here. We can just call a WordPress function named get_stylesheet_URI. Okay, and that's a WordPress function that we are calling, so include parentheses right after it. Cool. And if we wanted to include a second or third CSS file, you could just duplicate this line here. And if you wanted to load a JavaScript file instead of CSS, you would just change this word from style to script. Singular script, not plural scripts. But I wouldn't worry about that because I will show you how to load a JavaScript file very soon. Okay, but for now, if we go ahead and save this file, and let's also be sure to save the recent changes to header.php, and then if we refresh in the browser, cool, we see that all of the text is orange. And that's because in our style.css file, remember we wrote this as a test in an earlier lesson. So if I change orange to green, you get the idea. Our CSS file is loading. Now before we move on to our final task for this lesson, which is loading the black admin menu bar up at the top here, before we get to that, I want to take a minute to review all of that code we just wrote in our functions.php file, because this can definitely feel confusing or overwhelming. So let's break it down. Really, all we did was create or define a brand new function that we chose the name of. We got to make this name up. The name doesn't matter. Within that function, we called a WordPress function and pointed towards the CSS file that we wanted to load. Okay, but remember that when you create and define a function, the function doesn't actually run. Someone or something needs to call that function later on. And that's exactly what we are doing in this line of code. WordPress has a function named addAction, and you give it 2 arguments. Let's begin with the second argument. This is just the name of a function that you want WordPress to call at a specific moment, and this is how you say which moment that should be. So WordPress has tons of different hooks or moments that we can hook onto. So altogether, this line of code is basically saying, hey, WordPress, right before you get ready to output your code that's going to go in the header, that's going to go in this WP head area, right before you're getting ready to output that, we want to tack onto that moment, and we want you to run our custom function. Now, before we move on, I want to go over one last topic that is a common point of confusion for people. You might be thinking, hey, I thought whenever we call or run a function, we have to put parentheses right after it, right? We did that here, and we've been doing that throughout all of our template files. So why don't we include parentheses after this name here? Right? If we want to call this function, why don't we add parentheses here? Well, we don't add the parentheses because we don't want to literally call this function right now, which means instead of you and I immediately calling the function right here and now, what we're doing is just telling WordPress, hey, here's the name of the function. It's up to you, WordPress, to actually run it at the precisely right moment. Okay, now let's move on to our final task of adding the black admin bar up at the top here. So to begin, let's jump into header.php, and what I want to do is move the closing body and closing HTML tags out of this file and into footer.php. If that doesn't make sense to you right now, that's okay, just follow along with me. So delete the closing HTML and delete the closing body tag. All right, let's save this, and then jump into maybe index.php, just for a frame of reference. From a bird's eye view, how is our page getting created? So first we include our header.php, then we output the main content, meat and potatoes of the page, and then we have footer.php. So back to header, we don't want to close out the body and HTML sandwiches within this file. We want to do that at the very end of the HTML that gets generated. So over in footer.php, underneath our dummy text, let's close out the body tag and close out the HTML tag. And now, here's the important part. Right before the closing body tag, I want you to drop into PHP and call a function named WP_footer. If you've ever worked with JavaScript before, you know that a lot of times you don't want to load JavaScript files up in the head section. Instead, you want to load them right before the closing body tag. So this is just our way of giving WordPress the final say before we close out the body tag. So WordPress can use this for all sorts of things, like loading JavaScript files, or in this case, for adding the black admin menu bar up at the top of the page. Okay, so with this in place, if we save this file and refresh, awesome, there's the admin bar. And that's actually going to bring this lesson to a close. At this point in the course, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, when is the website going to start looking like it was built in the last decade? Because right now, this plain white background and the text and the full width of it, it looks like it was built in 1995. Well, in our very next lesson, we will address the visual or graphic design of our theme. Let's keep our progress rolling, and I will see you then. Hello, everyone. In this lesson, we will learn how to convert a static HTML and CSS page into a living, breathing WordPress theme. So up until this point in the course, the WordPress theme and site that we've been working on has zero style or design to it. Now this isn't very realistic, is it? Because in the real world, we're never going to make any money if our websites are this ugly. So we need to add design and art direction to our theme. Now we could start writing CSS together and try to create something that looks nice, but this isn't a course about CSS. In this course, we want to stay focused on WordPress, PHP, and a little bit of JavaScript. So in order to avoid getting bogged down in CSS and design for the next 20 hours, what we're going to do is download a little bit of HTML and CSS that I've already written for us. But it could just as well be HTML and CSS that you or your coworker wrote. The actual HTML and CSS itself doesn't matter. What matters is that we learn how to integrate it into a living, breathing WordPress theme. Okay, so right now, let's go and download my starter code. I want you to open a new tab in your web browser and visit this URL. So it's github.com/learnwebcode/university-static. Anyways, once you're on this page, we just want to use this green clone or download button that we see here. And once you click on that, then we are interested in this download zip button. And once you go ahead and extract that zip file, you will have a folder named University Static Master. Now this time around, it doesn't matter where you place this folder, because the folder isn't going to have anything to do with our WordPress site. We're basically just going to copy and paste stuff from this new folder into our WordPress theme folder. Okay, but first, let's just go ahead and look within this new folder. And the first thing I want you to do is find the index.html file and preview it in your web browser. So in this empty Google tab, I will just drag index.html on top of it. And this page is just static HTML. This file has zero PHP in it and has absolutely nothing to do with WordPress. So none of the links are real, they don't go anywhere, none of the buttons do anything. It's our job now to copy and paste this HTML into our WordPress theme and then sort of hollow it out and program it to pull in real user-generated WordPress content like posts and pages. So we want to start moving over some of this HTML into the WordPress theme that we've been working on that lives at fictionaluniversity.dev. And the question of the moment is, where do we begin? Well, it's just personal preference, but I always like to begin with the header. So in this case, the part that I'm highlighting right now, we've got the logo in the top left and the navigation links and buttons in the top right. So if we want to move or copy and paste this into our theme, why don't we open up that new folder that we downloaded just a moment ago, and let's open this index.html file in our text editor. All right, so this is the HTML that is creating this page. And if we're interested in this top header part, all we need to do is look right below the opening body tag here, and we see a header element. So let's just place our cursor at the very beginning of that header tag, and then scroll down a bit, and you'll see that that header element closes right here. So I'm just going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and click at the end of it here. Cool, and now with that code highlighted, let's just copy it into our clipboard. And now we want to paste it into one of the files in our WordPress theme folder. So I know this is getting a little bit confusing. That's why I'm using one text editor with a light color scheme and another text editor with a dark color scheme, right? So this dark screen is the files that we just downloaded a minute ago. And this light screen is the WordPress theme folder that we've been working on for several lessons now. So here's what I want you to do. In your theme folder, jump into our header.php file. And right below the opening body tag, let's delete this h1 element and then go ahead and paste in your clipboard. Okay, and if we save this and refresh our WordPress site, here's the new header content. Now it's not styled yet, and that's because we haven't moved over any CSS code yet. Don't worry, we'll do that in just a minute or two. But next, let's move over the footer from the HTML page. Right? So on this page, if we scroll down to the very bottom, we see this footer section that we are probably going to want on every page of the website. So back in the recently downloaded index.html file, if we go ahead and scroll down to the very bottom of it, right above the closing body tag and this script tag, we see a footer element. So why don't we place our cursor at the end of the footer element and then scroll up a bit. Okay, and here we see the opening tag for the footer. So let's just hold down the Shift key on our keyboard and click at the very beginning of the footer element. Then copy this into our clipboard. And then we want to paste it into our theme folder's footer.php file. So back in our WordPress theme folder, jump into your footer.php file. And we want to leave these lines intact, but let's go ahead and delete this dummy paragraph. And then just go ahead and paste in your clipboard. And if we save that and refresh the WordPress site, now we've got the footer in place. However, we still don't have any sort of styling or design. So next, why don't we take the CSS from this page and add it into our WordPress theme's style.css file. So in that new folder that we downloaded in this lesson, go ahead and open the style.css file in a text editor. And we want to copy everything in this file into our clipboard. So press Command A if you're on a Mac or Control A if you're on Windows. That will select everything and then copy it into your clipboard. And then back in your WordPress theme folder, jump into style.css. Remember, we created this file and this comment back when we first created the theme. Now we definitely want to leave this comment in place. But right below it, we can delete this test placeholder CSS we had, and then let's just paste in our clipboard. Then save this file, and then if we refresh on the front end of our website, we see the hint of a design shining through. Okay, now looking at this page, I see all sorts of things we need to fix. So let's just start working through it bit by bit. So you'll notice down here in the footer, underneath this Connect With Us column, back in the HTML template for this page, there's supposed to be social network icons there. And when I created this page, I used an icon package named Font Awesome. So we just need to make sure that we load the Font Awesome icon pack in our WordPress theme. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if we open the index.html file that we downloaded earlier in this lesson, and we scroll up to the very top of it, you'll notice that in the head section, on this line, I'm loading the Font Awesome icon library. Now your first instinct might be to copy and paste this line into the header.php file in WordPress, but that's not the ideal way of doing things. Let me show you why. So back in our WordPress theme folder, if we jump into header.php, up at the top, here's our head section, and remember that instead of loading CSS files directly here, we added this WP head function so that WordPress can be in control of loading different files and assets. So if we want to load another CSS file that loads up the Font Awesome icon pack, we actually want to jump into our theme's functions.php file. Now remember that this is the line of code that loaded our main style.css file. So if we want to load another CSS file, what we can do is just right above this line, let's call the WP onQ style function again. All right, now within the parentheses, we want to pass in two arguments. The first is a nickname that we get to make up. Why don't we call this one Font Awesome? The name doesn't matter, it should just make sense to us. And then comma, and then let's include a second argument, and this just needs to be a location that points towards the file. Now if we jump back into our index.html template file, you can see here that I was loading Font Awesome from an external URL. So let's just copy and paste part of this URL into WordPress. So do this with me. Place your cursor in between this colon and the first forward slash, and then I want you to select all the way to the end of the file name. So it ends in .css. Okay, so with that selected, let's copy it into our clipboard. And then back in our WordPress functions.php file, just paste that in between the quotes for this second argument. Cool. So now if we save and refresh, those icons are in place. Now let's move on to the next fix. So the next thing that I notice is that the text on this page is using a generic font, but the text on the HTML template is using a custom font. And if we look at this index.html file in our text editor, right above the font awesome line, you can see on this line, I'm loading custom fonts from Google. So if we want to move this over into WordPress, let's just jump back into our themes functions.php file. And right above the line that we just created a moment ago, let's add a new line. And let's just call that WP onQ style function again. So in the parentheses, the first argument is a name that we make up. Let's call it custom Google fonts. And then let's add a comma and quotes for the second argument. And we just need a URL that we can paste into there. So back in index.html, on this Google Fonts line, place your cursor in between the colon and the first forward slash, and then drag to the right, and stop right before that ending quote. Okay, with that selected, let's copy it, and then back in our WordPress file, paste it into this second argument. Cool. Now let's save that and refresh our WordPress site. And it's a subtle change, but you can see that we are now using custom fonts. Next, let's focus on the actual content of the home page, right? So instead of this generic listing that loops through our blog posts, instead of that, why don't we work on importing this custom welcome area and 2-column layout and slideshow. So to do that, let's jump back into our index.html template. And you can scroll up to the very top, and then you'll notice that we've already imported this header element. So scroll down a bit until you get to the end of the header element, and then let's place our cursor right before this page banner element. Okay, and then let's scroll down all the way to the bottom, right before the footer element begins. So we don't want to include this, we've already copied and pasted that. So just hold down Shift and click right here at the end of this div. So let's just copy that to our clipboard, and then let's jump over to our WordPress theme folder, and the file that controls the home page is index.php. Now in this file, we still want to begin by including the header template, and we still want to end by including the footer template, but we want to get rid of everything in between. So let's delete this test placeholder loop code that we wrote earlier. Okay, and now we want to paste in the HTML from our clipboard, but you'll notice that we are currently in PHP mode. So on this line, let's just drop out of PHP, and then right before get footer, we can enter back into PHP. So that means right here, we are in HTML. So we can just go ahead and paste in our clipboard. Let's save that and refresh the WordPress site. Looks good. We just have two quick problems to solve. The first issue is that we are missing the images or photographs that should be displayed here, and then down here as well. And the second problem is that this slideshow section isn't behaving like a slideshow. Okay, so let's fix both of those things, but let's begin with the missing photos. So all we need to do is look within the new folder that we downloaded at the beginning of this lesson, and we need to copy or move this images folder into our WordPress theme folder. And while we're at it, I also want you to copy over this CSS folder and this JS or JavaScript folder. So you should be able to just click on one folder and then hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows, and then just click on the other folders that you want. Then right click and choose Copy, and then we're just going to paste them into the WordPress theme folder. So remember, your theme folder lives within your local sites or projects folder, or wherever you set up WordPress. So open that up, and then drill into your theme folder. So if you're using my Vagrant setup, go into Fictional University, and then the App folder, and then WP Content, and then Themes. And here's our Fictional University folder. So go in there, And this is where we just want to paste in our clipboard. Cool, so we copied over those 3 folders, and now if we refresh our website, we still don't have the images, but now we are very close. We just need to update our HTML to look for the images in the right folder. So back in our text editor, in our theme folder, jump into index.php, and up towards the very top of the file, you'll see a div with a class of page banner BG image. And it's using an inline style that's trying to pull in a background image. And this code tells the web browser to look within the current folder for a subfolder named images, and look inside it for a JPEG named library hero. So the reason our photo isn't loading is because if we go up to our address bar, we don't have an images folder in the root of our domain or the root of our project directory. Instead, we do have a WordPress folder named wp-content, and then within that folder we have a themes folder, and then the name of our specific theme is fictional university theme, and that is where the images folder lives. So then we could look within there for libraryhero.jpg. Okay, cool. So this path works, but look how long this is. You probably don't want to have to type this out every time you want to load an image. So let's go back and jump back into our text editor, and I'll show you a trick. So go ahead and select this current path. So from images to JPEG, copy that into your clipboard, and then go ahead and delete it. Okay, so now we just have empty parentheses. And what we're going to do is drop into PHP because WordPress has a function here that can help us. So within the PHP tags, let's echo out the results of a WordPress function named get underscore theme underscore file underscore URI. And it's a function, so open up parentheses. And it only takes a single argument, so quotes. So now just add a / and then paste in your clipboard, and that's all we need to do. This WordPress function will generate the path to our theme folder all on its own. Cool, so let's save this and refresh, and we're in business. Now let's just do the same thing for the 3 images down here at the bottom of the page. So back in index.php, if you scroll down to the very bottom, we see images bread, images apples, and images bus. So go ahead and pause the lesson and adjust these 3 image paths the same way that we just adjusted the image up at the top. The only problem now is that this section isn't cycling through the 3 slides. It's just showing all 3 slides stacked on top of each other. All we need to do to fix that is load a JavaScript file that handles the slideshow behavior. So back in our text editor, jump into our themes functions.php file, and loading a JavaScript file is just like loading a CSS file. So right above this line, let's add a new line, and let's call a function named wp-onQ, and then instead of style, it's script. Within the parentheses, the first argument is our chance to name the file. The name doesn't really matter. Let's just call it main university JavaScript. The second argument is where we point towards the file that we want to load. To point towards the JavaScript file, let's use a function named getThemeFileURI, and it's a function, so parentheses. And we want to look inside our theme folder, and then look inside that JS folder that we copied over a few minutes ago. And the file that we're looking for is named scripts-bundled.js. Now, loading a JavaScript file requires a few more arguments than when we load a CSS file. So after the quote and then this parentheses, let's include a comma so we can add another argument. And WordPress wants to know if this script depends on any other scripts, right? Does it have any dependencies? In this case, it doesn't, so we can just say null, it doesn't have any. Then WordPress wants a version number for our file. It doesn't really matter, let's just make up a version number of 1.0. And then the final argument is basically WordPress asking us, do you want to load this file right before the closing body tag? Yes or no? So we say yes or true, and that way it loads at the bottom of the page instead of up in the head section, which is much better for overall performance. So if we save this and refresh, now we have typical slideshow behavior. Perfect. That's going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we'll start working on an interior page template. Let's keep it rolling, and I will see you then. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will set up an interior page template. What in the world do I mean by that? Well, for example, this is our home page, but when someone clicks on a generic page like About Us up in the header or Privacy Policy down in the footer, we will need a generic page template to power those pages. So in this lesson, we will work on integrating this custom design of ours into our theme's page.php file. Now, in case it wasn't clear from the last lesson, by the end of this course, we will have made everything on this homepage dynamic and be pulling from real WordPress content. But for the time being, let's leave this static homepage as a placeholder and let's focus our attention on interior pages. Okay, now let me show you what I'm referring to when I say interior page template. So in that new folder that we downloaded in our previous lesson, University Static Master, if we look inside that folder, there is a file named interior-page.html. And if we go ahead and drag that file onto a new tab in our web browser, we see a template that we can use for the majority of our WordPress pages. Now, before we start integrating this HTML into our theme, let's first jump into our WordPress admin area and let's create a couple of new pages just so you and I are synced up. So from the sidebar, let's hover over Pages and click Add New. For starters, let's create a page named About Us. And for the content, let's just say this is the About page content. And then maybe paste in a bit of lorem ipsum dummy text. And then let's save or publish this. And while we're at it, let's create another new page. So add new. And let's name this page Privacy Policy. And for the content, this is the Privacy Policy content. Lorem ipsum. Okay, go ahead and save this. And now we can use this permalink to preview the page. So here we see the title and here we see the content. So it's working, but it doesn't look quite right. This is not a very pretty page template, right? So instead we want to use this as our page template. So to do that, I want you to open up the folder that we downloaded in the last lesson and open up interiorpage.html in a text editor. All right, so towards the top of the file, right after the opening body tag, we see this header element. And we already integrated that in our previous lesson. So let's scroll down below that. And right when that header element ends, we see a new div begin that has a class of page banner. So this is where we want to begin copying and pasting. So let's place our cursor at the very beginning, right before that div opens up. And then let's scroll down. Keep scrolling, keep scrolling. And around line 68 or 70, you'll see a div with a class of page section beige. And that corresponds with this area in the template. We don't need that for now. For now, let's just copy and paste over this top section. So back in the text editor, I'm going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and click right here. Cool. Now with that selected, let's copy it into our clipboard. And then we want to paste it into a file that lives in our theme folder. So within your WordPress theme folder that we've been working in, go ahead and open up page.php in your text editor. Okay, so we still want to begin with our header, we still want to end with our footer, and we still want to use the while loop in between, but we don't want to output this test placeholder HTML that says, this is a page, not a post. Okay, so let's delete that line of HTML. And let's also go ahead and delete the H2 HTML headline below it. And we can also delete this PHP the content function. Okay, so at this point, we still have a while loop. We are still calling the post function, which will get all of the appropriate data ready for us from the WordPress database. We're still closing out of PHP here and opening up PHP here, which means right where my cursor is right now, we can add HTML. So just go ahead and paste in your clipboard. And if we save this and refresh in the browser within our WordPress site, back on the privacy policy page, we've got that template in place. And now we can just start hollowing out some of the static content and replace it with WordPress functions that will pull in dynamic content. For example, let's begin with this large page title headline. So up at the very top of page.php, within this page banner section, here we see an H1 headline with a hard-coded value of our history. So let's just delete our history and instead drop into PHP and call the function named the title. Cool, so if we refresh, now we see privacy policy, which makes sense since that's the page we're on. Next, let's work on hollowing out this main content field area. So back in the text editor, if we scroll down just a little bit, here we see a div with a class of generic content. And what we want to do is just delete and hollow out all of the paragraphs inside it. Okay, and instead of those hard-coded paragraphs, we just want to drop into PHP and call the function named the content. And if we save and refresh, perfect. Now we see this is the privacy policy content. Next, let's address this sidebar menu of links that we see here. We are not ready to set this up yet, so for the time being, why don't we just comment it out? Let me show you what I mean. Back in page.php, on this line where we just called the content function, right above that we see a div that has a class of page links. So this is the div that is creating that sidebar menu, and if we want to comment it out, right above it we can just say less than symbol, exclamation, dash dash. So that begins the comment, and then let's end the comment right when the div ends. So it's just dash dash greater than to end the comment. So this way we leave this code in place so we can work with it in just a couple of lessons from now. But on the front end of our website, it's now hidden. Cool. We can circle back to that menu a bit later on, but for now, the next thing I want to address is this subtitle. In a future lesson, we will learn how to set up a custom field so that each page can have its own unique subtitle here. But for now, why don't we replace this hard-coded text with a message to ourselves so we don't forget to implement that feature later on. So back in page.php of our theme folder, up at the very top, within this page banner section, we see a paragraph with that hard-coded content. And let's delete that and replace it by just saying, don't forget to replace me later. Cool. Also, regarding the plain black background of this top area, if we look at that same area within our static template that we are copying from, we see that it's supposed to use a background image of the ocean. So we need to get that image to work within our theme. And if we jump back into our text editor, up at the top of page.php, within this page banner div, we see an inline style that is trying to load an image named ocean.jpg. And the reason this isn't working is because we don't have a folder named images at the root of our domain. In reality, our images folder lives within our theme folder. So let's do this. Let's hollow out these parentheses. So delete this images ocean JPEG. And in these parentheses, let's drop into PHP and then echo out the results of a function named getThemeFileURI. And we are calling a function, so parentheses. And this function will automatically provide the beginning part of the URL that will look in WP content, themes, and then our theme name. So now we can just say, quotes, look in the images folder for ocean.jpg. Cool, so let's save this and refresh. Now in a future lesson, we will set things up so that in the admin edit page screen, you can upload a unique image for each page. But for the time being, I think this placeholder ocean image will do the trick. Okay, moving on, that leaves us only with this little breadcrumb area that we still need to address. We will circle back to this section at the very end of this lesson, but for now, let's not worry about it. What I do want to worry about right now is the title of this page that we should be seeing up here in the title of this browser tab. Now the fact that we are seeing the URL of the page here instead of a legitimate title means that we are missing the title tag that usually lives in the head section of a website. So if that's the case, your first instinct might be to jump into your text editor and hop into our theme folder's header.php. And your instincts might be to go inside this header element and create a title tag and say, my little title. Now, technically that works, so we see the title here, but that's far from ideal because you want the title to be unique or specific for each page or post that you're viewing. So let's delete this title line. And instead, since we are already giving WordPress control over our head section with this WP head function, what we can do is jump into our theme folder's functions.php file and tell WordPress to automatically generate an appropriate title tag for each screen. So the question is, how do we tell WordPress to do something? And the answer is that you add an action. So down here, we've already added one action. And this is the event that we wanted to hook onto when our goal was to load CSS and JavaScript files. But in this case, we have a different goal. So let's drop down to the bottom here and let's add a new action. So we call the add action function. And the name of the WordPress event that we want to hook onto is after setup theme. And then let's pass this function a second argument. And this is just the name of a function that we are going to invent in about a second or two from now. So we get to make up this function name. Let's name it University Features. So we make up a name and then we just have to create a function with that name. So right above this new line that we just wrote, let's create a new line. And let's say function. We want to create a new function. We want it to be named University Features, parentheses, curly brackets. And when you want to enable a feature for your theme, the function that you call is add theme support. Now there are all sorts of different features that you can enable with this function, so we need to tell WordPress which feature in particular we're interested in. In this case, it's title tag. Okay, so with this new code in place, if we save this file and refresh the front end of our website, look up here in the top of my browser tab, privacy policy, which makes sense since we're on that page. But if we change the URL and go to About Us, cool, the title tag gets automatically generated by WordPress. Now you'll see that it's followed by a dash and then the name of our website. If you ever want to change this top level name of your website, just go into the Settings General screen of WordPress. Okay, moving on. Now that we have an About Us page and a privacy policy page, it would be nice if those links in the header and footer actually did something when you click on them. Now in a future lesson, I will show you how to create real dynamic WordPress menus that you can control and manage from the Admin Appearance menu screen. But for now, let's just manually add those links within our header and footer theme files. Let's start with the About Us header link. So in our theme folder within header.php, just a bit down from the top, here we see the About Us link. So let's delete the placeholder hashtag, and technically we could just say /aboutus. And that works if you're using a developer domain like we are, fictionaluniversity.dev. But if you're using something like MAMP or XAMPP, you might not be using a real developer domain. And in that case, you don't want your links to just point to the root of the current domain, because you might have multiple WordPress sites all living on your one local host. So instead, a more reliable way of creating links is to drop into PHP and echo out the results of a function named site URL, and that will automatically give you the root URL of your current WordPress site, and then anything we include as an argument gets added onto it. So we can just say /aboutus, let's save that. And now even if I go back to my home page, when I click on this About Us link, we are in business. Next, why don't we set things up so that if you click on this logo in the top left corner, it takes you back to the home page. So up at the top of header.php, just a couple lines down from the opening header tag, we see this H1 with a class of school logo text. And all we need to do is change this link's href value. So delete the placeholder hashtag, and then there's no sense in typing out that same code again. So let's just copy and paste what we set up down here from the opening PHP to the closing PHP tags. Copy that, back up here in this href value, paste it. Except this time we don't want to link to the About Us page, so we can simply call the function and not pass it any arguments whatsoever. And that will give us the root or home URL. So I'm on About Us, and if I click that logo, we're on the home page. Cool. Now let's do the same thing for a few of the links in the footer. So this should take us back to the home page, About Us, and Privacy Policy. So in the text editor, jump into your theme's footer.php. The first H1 that we see should link us back to the home page. So here's the A element and here's the href. So just delete the placeholder hashtag and then paste in your clipboard. This should point towards the home page, so let's delete this argument. So the parentheses are empty. Okay, and then down here, let's set things up for the About Us link in the footer. So delete that, paste in our clipboard. Perfect. Let's scroll down a little bit. Here's the privacy policy link. So delete that placeholder, paste in the clipboard. Change About Us to privacy policy. Cool, so if we save that, now we can use the links in the footer to jump around. Okay, so at this point, we now have a basic interior page template up and running. Now we can circle back to this little breadcrumb box here, because this box makes 0 sense on a top-level page like privacy policy. However, imagine we want to have sub-pages or children pages on our site. So for example, maybe on our About Us page, we want to have 2 children pages, our history and our goals. Well, in our very next lesson, that's exactly what we're going to learn about, parent and children pages, and how to work with them on the front end of our website. I know this lesson we just worked through and the one right before it, they were not tons of fun. They're probably 2 of the most boring lessons in the entire course, but we had to get up and running and working with the same page templates so you and I are in sync. From here on out, there won't be as much mindless copying and pasting. We're going to get back to truly educational content. So let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will learn how to adjust our theme templates to account for parent and children pages. So for example, imagine under our About Us page, we want 2 new children pages named Our History and Our Goals. Now before we update our theme to reflect parent-child page relationships, let's first go and actually create the 2 children pages over in the WordPress admin area. So let's add a new page. Let's title this one Our History. Paste in a bit of dummy content. And here's the important part. Over in the right-hand column under Parent, instead of No Parent, let's choose About Us. Okay, so we are saying that the Our History page belongs to the About Us page. So let's publish that. And just for good measure, let's create another new page. And let's call this one Our Goals. Dummy content. Over in the sidebar, tell the parent to be About Us. Let's save that. Okay, so we've created the 2 pages, but now we need the front end of our website to actually reflect those parent-child relationships. So for example, if we use this permalink here to visit the Our Goals page, our focus for this lesson is this breadcrumb box. Now at the moment, it is entirely hard-coded, right? So this shouldn't say Our History. It should say the name of the current page, which is Our Goals. So right now, let's dig into our theme code and make this breadcrumb box dynamic. So in our text editor, within our theme folder, let's open up page.php. And from the top, if you look below this page banner div, you'll then see a container. And right below that, this div with a class of metabox, that's the breadcrumb box. So you can see towards the end of this div, we have hard-coded Our History. So why don't we begin by deleting that hard-coded Our History, and instead we can drop into PHP to output the title of the current page. So let's just call the function named the title. Cool, so that makes this text dynamic. Next, let's set things up so that this entire breadcrumb box only appears on child pages, right? Because it makes sense that we would want a link back to the parent page, but once you are back on the parent page, there is no need for this box. So back in our text editor, we only want to display this metabox div or this breadcrumb box div if the current page being viewed is a child page. Now, the first step to achieving that is by using something in PHP called an if statement. So do this with me. Right above this div with a class of metabox, right above that, let's add a new line and let's drop into PHP. And within PHP, let's write our first if statement. So we just type out the word if, and then a pair of parentheses, and then a pair of curly brackets. Okay, now whatever we place within the curly brackets will only occur if whatever we place within the parentheses is true. So let's work through an example. In the curly brackets, let's maybe echo out a phrase that says, the sky is blue. Okay, and now within our parentheses on this line, let's say if 2 plus 2 == 4. So this will always be true, right? 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. So because our condition within these parentheses is true, PHP will run whatever we place within the curly brackets. So save and refresh. Here we see the sky is blue. But if we change our condition to 2 plus 2 = 7, that is false, right? So because it's false, the code in the curly brackets will no longer run. So now you can see we are missing the sky is blue. So what we want to do is come up with a condition. Instead of 2 plus 2 = something, we want our condition to be if the current page has a parent page, right? Because if it does, that means it's a child page. Now, in order to find out information about a page like that, we are going to need to review a WordPress topic named Post IDs. So what in the world is a post ID? Well, the easiest way to explain that is to jump into your WordPress admin screen and begin editing any existing post or page. And I want to direct your attention up to the address bar. Whenever you're editing a post or page, towards the end of the URL, you will see a number. And that is the unique numerical ID for that post or page. In my case, my Our Goals page has an ID of 24. And if I go check out the main About Us page, in my case, it has an ID of 16. In your WordPress website, it might have a different ID number, but that's not important. What is important is that each page and post has this unique number. And back in our code, we can use that unique ID number to find out information about a page or post. So right now, I want to show you a few WordPress functions we can use that are related to post IDs. So for the time being, let's delete this if statement. So now we just have this empty PHP section. And I want you to type this out with me. Let's echo out the results of a WordPress function named get the ID. And notice the I and D are capitalized. But if we save that, here we see a 16 on the About Us page. And if we go back to the Our Goals screen, we see a 24. Cool. So this get the ID function will give us the ID of the current page that's being viewed. But that's not exactly what we're interested in. We want to know if the current page has a parent page. So instead, let's do this. Let's delete this line, and instead, let's echo out the results of a WordPress function named WP get post parent ID. And this function will do exactly what it says it will do. So within the parentheses, we give it an ID for a page or post, and this function will respond by giving us back the ID number for that page's parent. So for example, if we were on the Our Goals page and we wanted to find the ID of this page's parent, Well, this page itself has an ID of 24, but instead of hard coding that number, we want this to be dynamic. So to get the ID of the current page, remember the function get the ID. So altogether, what this line of code is saying is get the ID of the current page we're viewing, and then WordPress, we want you to use that number to look up the ID of its parent page. So if we save this and refresh, we see a 16. And remember, that's the ID of my parent About Us page. And if we go to that About Us parent page, the number we see is 0. And that's because this page, About Us, doesn't have a parent. So this function, WP get post parent ID, it will return 0 if a page doesn't have a parent. And if a page does have a parent, we just get the ID of that parent page. Now that behavior will play very nicely with an if statement. Let me show you what I mean. Let's bring this full circle and get back to an if statement. But before we go ahead and delete this line, I want you to copy part of it to your clipboard. So beginning from the W at the start of this function name, and then all the way right before the semicolon, let's copy this part into our clipboard so we don't have to type it again in a few seconds. Cool. So now let's go ahead and delete this line, and let's put everything together. So let's write an if statement, if parentheses, curly brackets. Within the curly brackets, let's echo out and say, I am a child page. Now within the parentheses right after the if, for our condition, I want to show you something neat. So we already tried 2 plus 2 equals, and then 4 would be true, and then some other made up number, this would be false. But obviously we don't always want everything to be a mathematical equation that evaluates to true or false. In PHP and many other programming languages, there's a special Boolean value. If you say true, that will obviously evaluate to true. So we see I am a child page. You could also say false. But beyond that, what's neat is simply a value of 0 will evaluate to false, right? So now we do not see I am a child page. And any number such as 1 or any number that's larger than that will evaluate to true. I am a child page. So here's the cool part. For our condition, we can just paste in our clipboard, because remember, this function will give us the ID of the parent page. And if the page doesn't have a parent, it returns a 0. And if it's a 0, that evaluates to false. Cool, so now we finally have a bit of code that will only run if the current page is a child page. So we're on the Our Goal screen and we see I am a child page. If we go to the main About Us parent page, we don't see that message. So now all we need to do is move this div with a class of metabox. This is that little breadcrumb box. Let's just move this HTML to live within the if statement. So let's do this. Let's delete this echo I am a child page, and right above it on this line, right after the curly bracket, let's drop out of PHP. And then on this line, when the curly bracket ends, right before that, let's go back into PHP. So now on this line where my cursor is, we can have regular old HTML. So now let's just cut and paste this metabox breadcrumb box. Let's cut it, and then let's paste it right here. Cool, so let's save that. And I'm on the About Us screen. Now we no longer have that breadcrumb area. But if I go back to the Our Goals page, cool, there it is. The next thing we should work on is adjusting this so that the words About Us are not hard-coded, right? Because what if we were on a child page that didn't belong to About Us? For example, down in our footer, remember we created a privacy policy page. So let's click on that. And what if we had a child page that belonged to privacy policy? Well, in that case, we wouldn't want our template to have this About Us title hard-coded. Instead, we would want this to dynamically pull in the name of the parent page. Now, before we write the PHP code to achieve that, why don't we first go and create an actual privacy policy child page so that things will be easy to test and see if they're working. So back in the admin section, I will use the Add New button. And let's just create a new page and maybe call it Cookie Policy. paste in a bit of dummy content. And the important part is that we want to set the parent to privacy policy. Okay, so let's save this. And now if I use this permalink here to view that new page, cool, so there's the title, cookie policy, but this back to about us link doesn't make any sense. Instead, it should say back to privacy policy. So right now, let's write a bit of PHP code to make this dynamic. So let's delete this hard-coded about us, and instead let's drop into PHP, and let's echo out the results of a WordPress function named getTheTitle. Now this function name sounds very similar to the function that's just the title. The difference between these two functions is that the title will output the title of the current post or page, whereas getTheTitle allows you to pass in an ID number in these parentheses, and it will give you the title for that post instead of just the current post that you've looped through. So we don't want to hard code a numerical ID here. We want this to be flexible. Let's just place an X just as a temporary placeholder, and we will circle back to this in just a moment. For now, let's shift our focus onto the href attribute. We want to replace this hashtag with a URL that points to the parent page of the current page. So within those quotes, let's drop into PHP, and let's echo out the results of a function named getPermalink. So this function is similar to getTheTitle. Instead of being limited to just the current page or post that we've looped through, we can pass it a number or an ID, and it will give us the permalink for that post or that page. So let's also just place an X here as a placeholder. And now all we need to do, instead of having an X here and here, we just need to use the same ID number that we created up here with these two functions, right? Remember this WP getPostParentID function will give us the ID of the current page's parent page. Now this code that I'm highlighting right now is a lot to type, so we probably don't want to have to type that out again here and here. Instead, right above this if line, why don't we create a variable that stores this numerical ID, and then we can just access that variable again and again. So let's create a variable, and we can make up the name. Let's call it the parent. The name doesn't matter, we're just making something up that we can remember. And we just want it to equal the number that this function generates. So let's just copy and paste this, or you can even cut and paste it, right? So now the parentheses for the if statement will be empty, and we can say that our variable equals that. And now we can use this variable in three places. We can use it as the condition for our if statement. So we can say if our variable, right? Because if it's a 0, that will evaluate to false. It'll work just the same as this. It's just less typing this time around. And then as you might have guessed, we can use that same variable where our X placeholders are. So right here, let's delete the X and just say the parent. And let's do the same thing for this X. So getTheTitle and then the parent. And then if we save this and refresh our cookie policy page, which is a child of privacy policy, when I refresh, now we see back to privacy policy here. And if I click on that, cool, it successfully takes me to the parent page. And if I go up into the address bar and visit the About Us, Our History subpage or child page, cool, we see back to About Us. And if we click it, the link indeed works. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself, how are visitors of the website supposed to navigate to the child pages, right? We're on the About Us parent page, and nowhere do we see links to the two children pages. Well, that is the exact issue that we are going to fix and work on in our next lesson. We will learn how to add a sidebar menu right about here that automatically includes links to any and all children pages. It should be a lot of fun to code out. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson. Hello, everyone. Let's take a quick break from our project to answer one of the most common PHP questions, and that is, why do certain functions need to be echoed while other functions don't? In order to understand the answer to this, let's write a couple of functions together right now. So jump into your text editor And within your theme folder, let's open up index.php. We're just going to write a bit of test code for educational purposes that we will delete in about 5 minutes from now. So it doesn't really matter where we type this, but I'm just going to open up a new PHP area right below the header. Okay, and now we can experiment. So type this out with me. Let's imagine we want to create our own brand new function. So function, and let's call it double me, parentheses, curly brackets. And let's imagine that the purpose of this function that we are creating is that when you call it, you give it a number, and this function will double that number and give you the result. So for example, below the function definition, when it's time for us to actually run and call the function, we might say double me 5, right? And we would expect that to generate 10. Or if we said 8, we would expect it to generate 16. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that happen within the function definition. So within these parentheses, we want a parameter that can receive the incoming number. Doesn't matter what we call it. Let's just call it $x as a placeholder variable. Okay, and then in the curly brackets, in the body of the function, we could just echo out whatever number that someone passes into this function times 2 or asterisk 2. Cool. So now down below this function definition, we could say double me 4, right? And we would expect that to echo out 8 onto the page. So if we save this and refresh the home page of our website, if I zoom in a bit, there you can see the number 8. Cool. And if we change this to 25, save, we see the number 50. So that's an example of a function that we don't need to echo. We just call the function and it echoes something out onto the page for us. However, not all functions are like this. Most functions, or I should say a lot of functions, instead of echoing out their result, they return their result. So what does that mean? What does return do? It's basically a function's way of saying, my work here is done. I've done my job and now I'm returning this result, or I'm returning this value. So then down here, when we call or run the function and say double me 25, this will still equal 50. PHP will evaluate this to be 50. However, we are not doing anything with that value of 50. In this case, it's just going to sit in PHP's memory and we aren't doing anything useful with it. So if we save this and refresh, you'll notice that that value of 50 disappears up here. So now it's up to us to actually do something with the value that this function returns. Now there are a million different things we could do with the value. Probably the most obvious example would be that we could echo it out. So echo the results of double me 25. So now that will indeed show 50 again. Now functions that return values like this are really nice because they're so flexible, right? Because in the world of programming, there's a lot of things we need to do other than just echoing out simple values. So for example, we could create a variable, magical number, and tell it to equal double me 10, right? So we aren't trying to echo anything onto the page, we're just setting a variable to equal this value. Or, for another example, maybe we want to use that function as an if statement condition. So for example, we could say if double me 12 equals 24, then echo out onto the page, the function is performing the math correctly. Cool. So you get the idea. This is not a real world example. You'd probably never do this. But the idea is that you can use the value that a function returns anywhere. Now before we bring everything full circle and tie this back into the topic of WordPress specifically, let's have a bit of fun first. So right now let's delete this if statement. So we've still got our double me function definition. And right now, below this, let's create another brand new function named triple me. Instead of typing it out, we can just copy and paste this function. So copy, paste. Let's change the name to triple me. And then on this line, change this from ×2 to ×3. Okay, now below this, let's actually call and run these two functions together. because I think this will really illustrate the power of functions that return values. They're so flexible that they can fit together nicely. So let's begin by saying double me 5, so that would be 10, but then we can wrap that within the triple me function. So then right before that we could say triple me, parentheses, end the parentheses here. So instead of just saying triple me 10, I'm trying to show you that you can use the value that a function returns as an argument for another function. So let's test this out by echoing it or outputting it onto the page. If you triple 10, we would expect to see 30. So save this, refresh. Cool, and if I zoom in, you can see a value of 30. Okay, now that's enough PHP for the sake of PHP. Let's tie this back into WordPress. So when it comes to the WordPress functions that we don't have to create, that we just get to leverage, it can be a bit confusing whether a function is going to echo something for us or if it's just going to return a value and so we need to echo it. So let me show you a tip that can save you tons of confusion. Back in the text editor, I will delete all of this sample code so that we can talk about WordPress functions. So for example, WordPress has a function named the title, but it also has a function named get the title. Also, there's a WordPress function named the ID, but WordPress has another function named get the ID. So how do we make sense of this? Well, there's a rule of thumb that if a WordPress function begins with the word get, that means it's not going to echo anything for you, it's just going to return a value, and it's up to you to use that value however you see fit. On the other hand, if a function begins with the word the, that means WordPress will indeed handle echoing and outputting it onto the page for you. Now at this point in the course, I say we just leave it at that. So I'm going to delete all of this test code from this lesson. So I'm putting my index.php file back to the state that it was in before this lesson even began. And moving forward, I wouldn't worry about preemptively memorizing every function and knowing exactly what it does, because that's not how people work in the real world. In the real world, you will Google in plain English terms whatever you're trying to accomplish in WordPress with code, and in the search results, you'll want to look for two main websites, codex and developer.wordpress.org. These are the official WordPress websites, and they have a wealth of information. They will tell you exactly what a function does, how to use it, what arguments you can pass it, and most importantly, it will tell you if the function returns something or outputs something for you. Now, having said all of that, you don't need to go and do any of your own research at this point. Relax, take a deep breath, you're in this course for a reason. It's my job to gradually introduce you to more and more WordPress functions, and by the end of this course, with a little bit of repetition thrown in there for good practice, you will have a rock-solid understanding of what WordPress functions are at your disposal and what they do. I'm never a fan of preemptive memorization. I'm big on practicing, experimenting, and organically building up your understanding. So long story short, even if you didn't understand everything in this lesson 100%, I wouldn't worry about it because we're going to keep practicing these same concepts several more times. Hopefully this lesson cleared up a bit of confusion. Let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will learn how to set up a menu of children page links for the current page that you are viewing. So for example, if I navigate to our About Us page, we know that this page has two children pages named Our History and Our Goals, but we don't see links to those anywhere. So our goal for this lesson is to add a menu right about here that has links to the applicable children pages. If you think back to several lessons ago, you will remember that we actually commented out that menu. So over in your text editor, within your theme folder, jump into page.php, and if you scroll down about halfway or a little bit further, remember this div that we commented out. So at this point, we can just remove these comments and then remove this closing comment down here. Okay, so we've got this div with the class of page links, and if I save this and refresh the page, here's the menu that I'm referring to, but right now it's hard-coded, which means it's not dynamic. What I mean is the hard-coded data of About Us, Our History, and Our Goals only makes sense because that's a contrived example. But if we scroll down to the footer and click on the privacy policy page, now it becomes painfully obvious that the menu is not dynamic, right? Instead of About Us, this should say Privacy Policy, which is the current parent page. And then down here, we should see links to any privacy policy children pages. So right now, let's begin writing the code to make this menu dynamic. Let's focus on this list of children links first, and then after that, we'll work on this parent page header link. So back in the code, here is the unordered list of links, right? There's a list item for each link. So we don't want these list items to be hard-coded, so let's just delete these. So now we have an empty UL element, and within that element, let's drop into PHP, and let's call a WordPress function named WP list pages. Now, before we even worry about providing any arguments inside the parentheses, let's just save this and see what it does. So that function created links to every single page on our website, which is obviously not what we want. We only want children pages of the current page being viewed. Also, up here, we can see that this function outputs this odd little title named Pages, and we don't want this. So the question becomes, how do we tell this function WP list pages to do what we want it to do? Well, obviously that's the job of arguments that we can pass it within the parentheses. However, this function needs us to provide it arguments in a very specific format. So for example, we can't just include one argument and then a comma and then another argument. Instead, this function wants us to pass it an array. And not just any array, it needs an associative array. So right now, let's take a quick time out and forget about this function and instead answer the question, what in the world is an associative array? So several lessons ago, we saw an example of a very basic array. So to refresh your memory, let me create a very basic array. Maybe I'll create a variable named animals and set it to equal an array. So then within that array, I can say cat, comma, dog, comma, pig. So an array lets us have multiple pieces of data that live within a larger collection. However, what if I wanted to associate a value with each animal? So for example, what if I wanted to list the sound that each animal makes? So for cat, it would be meow, for dog, it would be bark, and for pig, it would be oink. Well, in order to do that, I would need to create an associative array. So check this out. Let me delete this line, and let's imagine I want to create a variable named animal sounds. And I set it to equal an array, and then within the array, the first item is cat, and then right after cat, I say equal symbol greater than meow, and then include a comma and do the same thing for dog. Now, I could list all the items on a single line, but when I'm working with associative arrays, just to stay organized, I like to put each one on its own line. So we've got cat equals meow, then comma, dog equal symbol greater than, dog equals bark, comma, pig equals oink. And this is an example of an associative array. We've associated a value with each item. And now, maybe later on in my code, if I want to access the sound that a dog makes, and maybe I want to echo it out onto the page, I can just say echo, look inside my variable, so echo animal sounds. And then to look inside an array, you use square brackets. And then instead of looking for a zero-based numerical key, since we are working with an associative array, we can just reference this label or key name. So within the square brackets, I could just say dog, and be sure to end that line with a semicolon. And if we save and refresh, there we see the value of bark. Cool. So now that we are at least a little bit familiar with an associative array, let's get back to the task at hand, which is working with this WP list pages function. So let me delete this example code. And now let's get down to business of providing this function with an associative array that tells it exactly what we want it to do. So within the parentheses, let's say array, and then give the word array its own pair of parentheses, right? This is how you create an array in PHP. Now we could begin typing here, but just to stay organized, I like to drop down in between these array parentheses onto a new line. And the first thing I want to do is tell the function that it doesn't need to output this odd little pages title. So if we don't want that title, this function has a parameter named title underscore li for list item, and we can just set that to equal null. So just like earlier when we said cat equals meow or dog equals bark, we are saying the title equals empty or nothing. So if we save that and refresh, cool, that awkward title went away. Now we just need to tell the function that we don't want every single page on our website. We only want links to children pages of the current page. So back in our code, let's add a comma at the end of this line so we can add another item to the array. And this function has a parameter named child underscore of, and we just want to set that to equal the numerical ID of a certain page or post. Now before we make this dynamic, let's hard code a number just to see how it works. So for example, if I want children pages of the privacy policy page, I can find the numerical ID of the privacy policy page by going into my admin dashboard, looking under pages, and if I click on that privacy policy page to begin editing it, up in the URL address bar, I can see it has an ID of 18. So back in the code, if I say child of equals 18, save it and refresh, cool, there we see cookie policy, which is the only child page of privacy policy. And if I use this link in the header to visit the About Us page, if we want to display the two About Us child pages, we could just go into our admin dashboard, find the ID for About Us, which is 16. So if I say child of equals 16, cool, we see the applicable child pages. Now obviously, we don't really want to hard code a number here. We want this menu to be dynamic, right? Because if I go back to the privacy policy page, it should just automatically pull in the correct current child pages. So in order to make this dynamic, your first instinct might be to get rid of the hard-coded number and use the WordPress function get the ID, right? This will return the ID of the current page. So let's try that. So that works perfectly when you are on a parent page, but once we click on to the cookie policy child page, now that section is completely blank. And that's because once we are on a child page, now our code is going to try to use that child ID and try to find children of it. And that's not what we want. So we need to provide a different ID number here depending on the situation. If we are on a parent page, we can indeed go ahead and just use the ID of the current page. But if we are on a child page, we can't just use the current ID. We need to actively look up the parent page ID. So here's how I would handle things. Up above this function, so right when we're getting into PHP here, I would just create an if statement. So the word if, parentheses, and then curly brackets. And for my condition within the parentheses, I would say if the variable named the parent, remember we set up that variable in our previous lesson. We created a variable named the parent, and it will equal the ID of the current page's parent page, or if the current page is a parent, it will just equal 0. Okay, so let's leverage that variable again down here. So this code is saying only if that the parent variable does not equal 0, only if that's the case, run the code within these curly brackets. Or in plain English, only if the current page has a parent, do something. So let's just create a brand new variable and call it find children of. The name doesn't matter, I'm just making up this name. But if you're currently on a child page, let's set this to equal the parent ID. Okay, and what if this evaluates to false? So if you're viewing a parent page, this will be 0, which will evaluate to false. So this code will not run. And then what we can do is right after this curly bracket, we can say else, and then open up a new pair of curly brackets. And this will only run if this is false. So if this is the case, do this. Otherwise, else, do whatever we say here. In this case, let's assign our find children of, our made-up variable. In that case, we can go ahead and get the current ID of whatever page you're viewing. So get the ID. Cool, so now we've taken care of that conditional logic. Now down here, when we are actually calling the important WP list pages function, we can just say child of equals, and we can reference this variable of ours that we just made up. So find children of. So let's go ahead and save that and refresh. Perfect. So now, even though I'm on a child page of cookie policy, we still see links to children pages of the current section. So if I go up in the header and click on About Us, we see the 2 subpages, and even if I click on to Our History, we still have the relevant child links. Okay, now at this point, let's change gears and work on this blue header link that should always point back to the current section's parent page. So back in our code, here's that blue headline link, and we don't want it to be hard-coded to About Us. So first, let's make the title dynamic, and then let's make the href link value dynamic. So delete About Us, and drop into PHP, and then let's echo out the results of a WordPress function, get the title, and within the parentheses, we can just pass an argument of our the parent variable. This will work really nicely with this function because if this returns a 0, which means the current page is a parent page, this get the title function interprets a 0 as meaning the current page. Cool, now let's do something very similar for the href value. Delete the hashtag, drop into PHP, and let's echo out the results of get permalink. And within the parentheses, just pass it an argument of our the parent variable. Cool, so let's save that and refresh. So we're currently on the Our History child page, but if I click this blue headline, it takes me to the parent page. And if I go down into the footer and click on Privacy Policy, I can click on this to navigate to a child page, and we can always use this header link to go back to the parent page. Okay, so at this point, we've made the menu dynamic, but now we need to ask ourselves, what happens if we go to a page that isn't a child page, but also isn't a parent page because it doesn't have any children of its own? So for example, to show you what I'm talking about, up in the address bar, if I visit my sample page named test page 123, this page doesn't belong to any other pages, but it also doesn't have any of its own children. So in this case, we probably just don't want to display this side menu at all, right? So we wouldn't even want this blue headline to appear. So back in our code, what I recommend doing is wrapping this page links div, just wrapping that entire thing within a PHP if statement. So right before this begins, let's drop into PHP and say only if, parentheses, curly bracket, but let's only use the opening curly bracket and then drop out of PHP. So then we can have all of this HTML, and then right when that div is going to end, right after that, we can drop into PHP, close out the curly bracket for the if statement, and then close out of PHP. So now, all we need to do is fill out the if statement's condition within these parentheses. So we only want to display this menu if you are currently on a child page. So to check for that, we can just use our the parent variable, right? Because on a child page, this variable will equal a number larger than 0. So this will evaluate to true. And then right after that, we can say, or we also want to display this menu if you're on a parent page. So the or operator here is very powerful. It lets us have multiple conditions, and if either one of them evaluates to true, then this will run. Now, believe it or not, in WordPress, there is no easy way to see if the page is a parent. But there is a slightly roundabout, tricky way of doing it. So here's what I would do. Let's add a line right above this current line that we're on. Okay, and let's create a variable. We could name it whatever we want. I will call it test array. And let's set it to equal the results of a WordPress function named get_pages. This getPages function is very similar to WP list pages. Really, the only difference is that this function will handle outputting the pages onto the screen for you, whereas this function just returns the pages in memory. So if this function is almost identical to this function, that means we want to pass it an array of arguments. So within these parentheses, let's say array, and then I like to drop down just to stay organized. And the only parameter we need to use here is child of equals, and let's just use the ID of the current page, so get the ID. And now if the current page has children, this function will return a collection of any and all children pages. On the other hand, if the current page doesn't have any children, this function won't return anything. It will return null or false or 0. And as we know, within an if statement, if something is 0 or empty, it will evaluate to false. So if the current page has a parent, or if it is a parent, all we need to do to check for that is just type out our variable name, test array. So or test array. Cool, so let's save this and refresh this test page, which is neither a child page or a parent page. And hopefully this menu should disappear completely. Cool, but if we go back to the About Us page, the menu's back in business. We can go to a child page, we can go to the privacy policy page. Things are looking good. Now before we bring this lesson to a close, I have one last tip for you. If I go back to the About Us page, you'll notice that I have multiple children links. And you might be wondering, how can you control the ordering of these? For example, what if I wanted our history to come before our goals? By default, WordPress will use alphabetical ordering, but if you want to use your own custom ordering, all you need to do, down here when we are calling this list pages function, within our array of arguments, let's just add another item, and let's use a parameter named sort column and set it to equal menu_order. Now, if we save this and then jump into our WordPress admin screen, if I jump into the page that I want to be first, our history, over in the right-hand column in this page attributes area, you'll see an order box. Now, if I give that page an order of 1, and then go give the other Our Goals page an order of 2, well, those order values will determine which goes first. And that's going to bring this lesson to a close. That means we're done with relatively boring pages, and now we can move on to dynamic navigation menus and building out our blog. And after that, we'll get into the truly fun stuff, probably the reason you signed up for the course in the first place, which is learning about custom post types, custom fields, creating relationships, and pulling in information dynamically with JavaScript. We've come a long way, but we still have tons to learn. Let's keep it rolling. I'll see you in the next one. To get immediate and lifetime access to the full 26-hour video course, you can find a coupon link in the description for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.